Hey hey. Welcome back to Arcane Paradox. We've got something fire today. What if Pomfrey's scan discovered 101 active marriage contracts on Harry and Veela? Queen declared him stolen property. Likes and subs keep us going. Alright, story time. Chapter 1. The scan. The morning of September 2nd started the same way it always did, badly. Harry woke up before his alarm, which meant his brain had decided to be cruel about something, and lay staring at the canopy of his four-poster bed in the sixth-year boys' dormitory while the September light came in grey and unhelpful through the tower windows. Neville was snoring. Seamus had somehow kicked his blankets entirely off the bed without waking up. Dean's curtains were drawn, which meant he'd been up late writing to Ginny again, and Ron's bed was already empty, which was strange enough that Harry sat up. He checked his watch. 6:42. Ron Weasley voluntarily awake before 7 in the morning was either a sign of personal growth or a sign that something had gone wrong, and Harry had learned a long time ago to bet on the latter. He found Ron in the common room, sitting in the chair closest to the fireplace with his knees pulled up and his expression doing something complicated. There was a letter in his lap. Parchment, not paper, wizarding correspondence, and the seal had been broken with what looked like considerable force. Harry didn't ask. He just dropped into the chair across from him and waited. "Did you know," Ron said eventually, to the fire rather than to Harry, "that my mum filed paperwork with the ministry when I was 9? Betrothal paperwork." Harry processed this. For you. For you." Ron turned to look at him then, and the expression on his face was something Harry had never quite seen on Ron before. Not anger exactly. More like the ground had shifted under him and he was deciding whether to fall or find new footing. Ginny, specifically. She filed a formal betrothal intent with the Department of Magical Contracts on your behalf. Without asking you. Without telling me. He stopped. Pressed his mouth into a line. She sent me a letter last night. Wanted me to know before we heard it through other channels. Whatever that means. Harry stared at him. "I know," Ron said. "Ron, I know, mate. I'm not angry at you. I just..." He looked back at the fire. "I've been sitting here for 2 hours trying to figure out how to tell you and I still don't have anything useful to say about it, so I thought I'd just say the stupid thing and get it over with." Harry leaned back in his chair. The fire crackled. Somewhere outside the window the grounds were doing their early morning September thing, dew on the grass and the lake going silver in the half-light. "Does Ginny know?" Harry asked. "She says she does. She says she's fine with it." Ron's jaw tightened slightly. Which is a separate problem. Harry decided not to pull at that thread yet. There would be time for it later. Or there wouldn't be, and they'd deal with that too. He had a talent, developed over 6 years of crises, for not borrowing trouble before it arrived. What he didn't have, as it turned out, was any ability to predict just how much trouble was already in the mail. Madame Pomfrey ran her annual start-of-term health screenings the first week of September, and they were exactly as thrilling as they sounded. Every student trudged through the hospital wing at their assigned time, held out their arms, stood still while diagnostic charms swept over them in shimmering curtains of gold and blue, and received either a clean bill of health or a lecture about iron deficiency. Harry had always gotten the clean bill. He was malnourished in the technical sense. The Dursleys had never quite managed adequate caloric investment in their nephew, but Madame Pomfrey had been quietly supplementing his dietary plan since 3rd year without making a production of it, and he appreciated her for it. He arrived at the hospital wing at 10:15 on a Tuesday, as scheduled, in the middle of a conversation with Hermione about the new defense against the dark arts syllabus that he was fairly sure Hermione was winning on points. He sat on the examination table. He held out his arms. Madame Pomfrey said, "Language, Potter, sit still," even though he hadn't said anything, because she always said it preemptively with him, which he found funny in a tired sort of way. The diagnostic charm went out. It came back wrong. Not wrong in a medical sense, no alarm bells, no red cascades of warning light. Just wrong in the way that Pomfrey's face went from professional brisk to a very carefully controlled blank. The kind of blank that meant she was working to keep something off her face. "Hold still," she said. She cast it again. The same curtain of gold, sweeping from his feet to the crown of his head, and then the same return. The light gathered itself in the air in front of her and assembled into a diagnostic readout, which she read for approximately 4 seconds before reaching over to a drawer, removing her reading glasses, putting them on, and reading it again. "Madame Pomfrey?" Hermione was watching from the chair beside the window where she'd been waiting with her arithmancy notes. "Quietly, please." Pomfrey's voice was completely level. "Mr. Potter, I'm going to run a secondary scan. A different type. I need you to sit very still and not ask me questions until I'm finished." Harry looked at her face. "Okay," he said. The second charm was longer, wand movements Harry didn't recognize, a low murmured incantation in what sounded like Latin mixed with something older. The light this time was a deep bronze that moved like water rather than sweeping like a curtain, and it took nearly 2 full minutes to complete its circuit of him. When it resolved itself into a readout, it didn't float in the air neatly the way the standard diagnostic did. It produced what looked like a scroll, a projected parchment that unrolled from somewhere inside the light itself, dropping toward the floor and then continuing to drop, longer and longer, until the bottom of it brushed the stone and kept going. Hermione was on her feet. She had her wand out, not pointed at anything, just held the way she held it when her brain was running faster than her body. "What is that?" she asked. "That," Pomfrey said quietly, "is a covenant survey. It maps all active magical contracts connected to a given individual." She was reading the scroll. Her face was still entirely controlled. "I ran it because the standard diagnostic flagged an unusual density of ambient magical bindings on Mr. Potter's personal magical signature. I thought it might be a cursed object he'd come into contact with." She paused. "It is not a cursed object." "Then what is it?" Harry asked. Pomfrey looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. For a moment she looked less like the school nurse and more like someone who had just opened a door and found something much larger than expected on the other side. "Marriage contracts," she said. "Active ones. Bound to your magical signature, which means they were created with blood ritual or ministerial oath, not just paperwork. They're real, Mr. Potter. Magically enforceable." She looked back at the scroll. "I'm counting them now." The room was very quiet. "How many?" Hermione asked, barely above a whisper. Pomfrey counted. Harry watched her lips move. She reached the bottom of the scroll, moved back up, counted the subsections that had smaller notations attached. Her expression didn't crack, but something around her eyes went tightly careful in a way he'd never seen on her before. 101, she said. Hermione sat back down. Not gracefully, she dropped into the chair like her legs had made a unilateral decision. Her arithmancy notes slid off her lap and fanned across the floor and she didn't notice. Harry looked at the scroll. It was still hovering, still unrolled, bronze light making it look almost warm despite the content. He thought about Ron in the common room this morning, 2 hours with a letter and a fire and not enough words for it. "Right," Harry said. Pomfrey looked at him. "Right?" she repeated. "I mean," he gestured at the scroll. "What do I do about it?" "That," Pomfrey said, with something that might have been the very distant cousin of impressed, "is an excellent question that I have absolutely no clinical authority to answer. I can tell you the contracts are there. I can tell you they're active. What I cannot tell you is," she stopped, reread a section of the scroll, and her carefully controlled expression slipped, just slightly. "Mr. Potter. Several of these contracts have binding dates going back to before your parents were married." Harry stared at her. "Someone contracted you," Hermione said, her voice coming back as her brain took back control from her shock, "before you were even born." "Pre-birth betrothal contracts," Pomfrey said. "They're archaic. They were banned by the Wiesengemot in 1953, except under specific heritage provisions for ancient and noble houses. She was looking at the scroll again. Most of these are not ancient and noble houses. Most, Harry said. Not all. 3 of them involve ancient and noble houses. She paused. One of them is considerably more complicated than that. She cast a small charm and detached a section of the scroll, pulled it free like tearing paper, except it came away cleanly in a separate length. She handed it to him. Harry took it and read the notation at the top. Veela Conclave Blood Covenant. Date of binding, October 31st, 1981. Signatory, Apollon Delacour, Queen Regent, on behalf of the Conclave's sovereign line. Counterparty, James Charles Potter, acting as Ward Guardian under emergency succession provision. Status, active. Classification, Blood Sovereignty Tier. The date hit him like cold water. October 31st, 1981. His parents had died on October 31st, 1981. Someone had signed a contract involving him on the same day his parents were murdered. He sat with that for a moment, not letting it become something that swallowed him, just acknowledging its weight, and then set it aside because the weight of it wasn't useful right now and he needed his brain. Blood Sovereignty Tier, Hermione said from behind him. She'd gotten up from her chair and was reading over his shoulder. He hadn't heard her move. That's not a marriage contract. No, Pomfrey agreed. That's a claim of magical lineage ownership. That's, Madame Pomfrey, that's the Conclave saying they have a stake in his magic. Not just a betrothal. They're claiming partial sovereignty over him as a magical entity. Hermione's voice had gone sharp in the way it did when she found something that offended her on a fundamental level. That's not legal. That's not, is that legal? In British wizarding law, no. Under Conclave sovereign provision, which operates under a separate international magical treaty signed in 1847, Pomfrey stopped herself. I'm a nurse. I'm flagging this for the headmaster and the ministry. I'm not a contract lawyer. Don't, Harry said. Both of them looked at him. He hadn't meant it to come out quite that flatly, but he didn't take it back. Don't flag it for Dumbledore. Not yet. He was looking at the main scroll again, still hovering in its bronze light. 101 contracts. He let his eyes move down the list, names he recognized, names he didn't, house names from wizarding families he'd heard mentioned in passing, a few that were in languages he couldn't read. I need to understand what I'm looking at before I hand it to someone who might have opinions about what to do with it. Pomfrey held his gaze for a long moment. She was a woman of considerable professional ethics. She was also, Harry suspected, a woman who had watched Harry Potter get handed to adults for 6 years and had her own opinions about how that had gone. I'm required to inform the headmaster of any medically significant findings, she said carefully. Is this medically significant? Another pause. The contracts themselves don't represent a health risk. Then technically this falls under student privacy provisions, doesn't it? Hermione made a sound that was probably not supposed to be a laugh and covered it with a cough. Pomfrey looked between them. 24 hours, she said finally. I will give you 24 hours before I am professionally required to file a notification. And I will. She reached into the drawer where she kept things she wasn't technically supposed to keep and produced a small leather folio, make you a copy of this survey, because in my professional judgment, you have an immediate need for this information and a right to understand your own situation. She pressed the folio into his hands. Inside, the scroll had condensed itself to fit, the magic of it settling into something more portable. It still felt warm. Thank you, Harry said. She looked at him for one more moment with that same not-quite expression. You said right, she observed. When I told you the number. Just, right. What else was I supposed to say? Most people would have panicked. Harry glanced down at the folio. There are 101 contracts claiming some form of ownership over me that someone else signed without my knowledge, he said. Panicking about it won't unsign them. He tucked the folio under his arm and walked out of the hospital wing with Hermione at his heels, and he did not panic, because panic was a luxury that assumed the situation could still get worse, and Harry had learned a very long time ago not to make assumptions like that. The library alcove they'd claimed in third year, the one behind the restricted section entrance where you could see both doors but neither set of shelves directly faced you, was unoccupied, which Harry took as a sign that the universe was making the smallest possible amends. He spread the scroll across the table, weighted the ends with a transfigured paperweight and Hermione's copy of Wizarding Contract Law, a practitioner's guide, which she'd retrieved from the stacks in approximately 8 minutes and Harry had decided not to comment on. They read for 20 minutes in silence. Hermione was moving through the book at the same time, cross-referencing, and Harry was reading the scroll front to back, absorbing the names and the dates and the binding conditions with the same deliberate focus he'd developed for oral field reports in defense class, not looking for what was interesting, looking for what mattered. The oldest one is from 1979, Hermione said. That's the Knot contract. Filed through the Weisengamott's Heritage Provisions Office. Theodore Knott's grandfather contracted Harry's father to a betrothal agreement between their houses. What's the condition? First eligible daughter of house not to be of age. She looked up. You're aware Theodore Knott has a younger sister who turns 17 in November? I'm aware now. The Crabbe contract is from 1980. Same structure. Goyle contract the same year. These were, she stopped, pressing her lips together. These were Death Eater families, Harry. This was, I think they were betting on Voldemort winning and wanting to tie up access to the Potter line in case the war went differently. So they'd have a claim on me regardless of which side won. Or a claim on whatever political capital came attached to you. She turned a page. There are 14 contracts from Death Eater affiliated families. All filed in the 2 years before your parents died. Harry looked at those names on the scroll, 14 entries, the binding language colder and more formal than the others, filed with bureaucratic precision by people who had thought they were being clever. He felt something move through him that wasn't quite anger. It was more like a steady, purposeful contempt. They had sat in their offices in 1979 and 1980 and scribbled his name onto parchment without knowing who he was going to be, and now here he was reading their signatures. What about Molly Weasley's? He asked. Hermione found it without looking like she wanted to. Filed through the Muggleborn Integration Office, which allows non-ancient families to file betrothal intent under a simplified provision. The language is, she paused. It's affectionate, actually. Not like the Death Eater ones. She was clearly acting from, she wanted to protect you. Tie you to her family so you'd have security. She still didn't ask me. No. She didn't. Harry sat back. He thought about Mrs. Weasley, about the Burrow, about Christmas holidays and jumpers with his initial on them and the way she'd hugged him at King's Cross once with the specific fierceness of a woman who had appointed herself responsible for someone. He thought about all of that and then he thought about his name on a piece of parchment that she'd signed in 1993 when he was 13. Who else is from Hogwarts circles? He asked. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then she found the page and read it like she was defusing something. The headmaster countersigned 6 contracts as a witness. Which in itself isn't unusual. The headmaster acts as a magical guardian in certain provisions for students without active legal guardians. But 3 of those 6 have his signature in a primary binding capacity, not a witness capacity. She looked up. He didn't just witness them. He helped authorize them. The silence in the alcove was a different quality now. Harry looked at the ceiling. Stone, Gothic, centuries old. Above it, the astronomy tower. Above that, open sky. He thought about Dumbledore, about the kindness that was genuine and the choices that were made without asking and the way the headmaster had a way of arranging things for the best possible outcome as he defined it. About the way that Harry had spent 6 years inside Dumbledore's arrangements without always knowing they were arrangements. He thought about the way Dumbledore had looked at him at the end of last term, not unkindly, but with a weight in it, a sense of investment that Harry had always interpreted as caring but now found himself looking at from a different angle. "Which three?" he asked. Hermione gave him the names. Two were minor noble houses that Harry didn't know. The third was the Greengrass family, ancient and noble, Daphne Greengrass, who sat 2 rows ahead of him in potions and had never once in 6 years spoken to him voluntarily. "The Greengrass one is the most formal," Hermione said. "It's a full Wisengamot registered binding with a maturation clause. It activates when Harry turns 17. She checked the contract conditions. "Which is in July," Harry said. 11 months. 11 months, Hermione confirmed. Harry picked up the section of the scroll that Pomfrey had separated out. The Veela Conclave Blood Sovereignty Covenant. October 31, 1981. The date that he had been shaped around his entire life. He read it all the way through this time, carefully. It was in French and English both, the way formal international magical agreements were written. His French was barely functional. 2 years of Fleur Delacour's occasional contemptuous tutelage during the Triwizard year had given him enough to catch the sentiment, but the English translation was printed alongside, and it was clear enough. In the event of the failure of the primary protective covenant and the orphaning of the subject, the Veela Conclave, as signatories to the ancient compact of 1847, assert sovereign claim over the magical lineage of the subject Harry James Potter, whose potential has been assessed under conclave law as falling within the sovereign tier classification, a classification defined as magical capacity sufficient to alter the fundamental nature of bound compact magic. "Sovereign tier," Harry read aloud. Hermione leaned over. "They classified your magical potential. They assessed you. On October 31, 1981. The same day my parents died. Someone from the conclave was there," Hermione said, very quietly. "Or had been monitoring you. They assessed your magic while everything was happening," Harry said. "Yes." He set the document down. His hands were completely steady. He noticed this with a kind of remote curiosity, the way you noticed interesting details in a situation that was too large to feel all at once. The Veela Conclave had assessed the magical potential of a 1-year-old on the worst night of his life and had decided to sign a covenant claiming a stake in him. The anger, when it came, was clean. No heat to it. Just a solid, definite thing settling into place the way a foundation sets. "Right," he said again. "Harry." Hermione's voice had the quality it got when she was trying to say something difficult with her whole self rather than just her brain. This is a serious situation. 101 contracts, some of them with real magical enforceability, and the Conclave Covenant is, I know. I don't think you're fully, I think you should be more what?" She stopped. Looked at him. He looked back, and she read whatever was in his face, because Hermione was the best reader of faces he'd ever met, and after a moment her shoulders dropped slightly and she nodded. "More afraid," she said. "I was going to say more afraid." "I know," he said again. "I'm choosing not to be." "Is that actually a choice you can make?" "Yes." She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she opened her book to a new page and picked up her quill. "Then tell me what you need. I need to know which contracts are unenforceable on their own legal terms, improper filing, missing conditions, illegal provisions. Start with those." He was already thinking ahead, mapping it out. "Then I need to know who to call. Not the Ministry. Not Dumbledore." "Sirius," she said immediately. "Sirius," he agreed. "And I need to know everything there is to know about Veela blood sovereignty law, because that's the one that's going to matter most." "Why?" "Because it's the only one that isn't just a contract," Harry said. "It's a claim. And whoever Apollon Delacour is, she's going to come and make it in person." Hermione stopped writing. "You think she'll come here? To Hogwarts?" "Her contract is the oldest and the highest tier and it predates every other claim on the list." Harry rolled the scroll back up and tucked it into the folio with the separated section. When she finds out the scan happened, and she will find out, because I'd be surprised if the conclave doesn't have a monitoring charm on that covenant, she's going to come here and she's going to come angry, because 100 other contracts have been stacked on top of hers without her permission. He stood up, tucking the folio inside his robes. Which means I've got 24 hours before Pomfrey files her report and about the same amount of time before the conclave gets wind of what the scan found. So what do we do right now? Right now? He picked up his bag. We go tell Ron. Ron took it better than Harry expected and worse than Harry hoped, which was about right for Ron. He was quiet through the initial explanation. He was quieter still when Hermione laid out the scope of it, the 101 contracts, the Death Eater families, the headmaster's signatures, the Veela covenant. He held his face very carefully when his mother's contract was mentioned, looking at the table rather than at Harry, and Harry deliberately did not look at him during that part because there are some things you don't witness in order to give someone the privacy of feeling them. When Hermione finished, Ron picked up his pumpkin juice, looked at it, put it back down without drinking it. She wanted to protect you, he said. Still looking at the table. I know, Harry said. That doesn't make it, I know that too. Ron finally looked up. His jaw was tight but his eyes were clear. I'm going to be very angry at her for a while, he said. And I need you to know that's separate from you. I'm not angry at you. I know, Harry said, for the third time, and meant it differently each time. Ron nodded once, sharp and decisive, the way he decided things. Right. So. What do you need? Harry looked across the table at the two of them, Ron with his jaw set and his loyalty sitting so plainly on his face that it almost hurt to look at, and Hermione already making a second list on a fresh piece of parchment, cross-referencing two books simultaneously. He thought about the folio inside his robes, the warmth of it. 101 contracts. Every single one of them had treated him like something to be owned. I need a few things, Harry said. First, an owl to Sirius. Full explanation, everything, coded. He'll need to get his lawyers moving. He paused. Second, I need to find out who else at this school knows about these contracts. Because some of those families have kids here, and if their parents are going to come swooping in claiming marriages, I want to know before they do. The Death Eater kids, Hermione said. Malfoy? Ron asked. Not Malfoy. There's no Malfoy contract on the list. Harry thought about this. Which is interesting. Draco's going to be furious, Ron said, with a dark satisfaction that Harry understood completely. Third, Harry said, I need someone who knows ancient contract magic. Not textbook, practical. Someone who's actually broken contracts before. There's only one person in this castle who's done that, Hermione said. They looked at each other. She's going to gloat, Ron warned. Professor McGonagall always gloats quietly, Harry said. I can live with that. He pushed back from the table and checked his watch. 3 hours until Pomfrey's 24-hour clock ran out. He had the folio, he had his two best friends, and he had the complete and utter clarity that came from having nothing left to lose. Somewhere in France, he suspected, a Veela queen was about to have a very interesting morning. He found he couldn't wait to meet her. The owl to Sirius was the most important letter Harry had ever written, and he wrote it in 12 minutes in the dormitory with the curtains drawn and his privacy charm up, because he'd gotten very good at writing urgent letters fast. He hit the key points without editorializing: Pomfrey's scan, the number, the binding classifications, the Veela covenant and its date, Dumbledore's signatures, the maturation clause and the Greengrass contract timing. He added one line at the bottom: I need a solicitor who's worked blood covenant law and isn't afraid of Dumbledore or a Veela queen. If you know someone, get them moving tonight. He sent the letter with Hedwig, who accepted it with the air of someone who had been waiting for exactly this level of urgency and was professionally prepared. Then he went to find Professor McGonagall. She was in her office, which smelled of parchment and scotch and the faint mineral sharpness of transfiguration workings. She looked up when he knocked, and her expression did its standard recalibration at the sight of him, the tiny adjustment that said Potter, alone, no blood and not running, so probably not an immediate emergency but probably not a social call either. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Sit down." He sat. He put the folio on her desk and opened it to the full scroll. He watched her read the header section and saw the precise moment she understood what she was looking at, not because her expression cracked, but because she went very still in the particular way that McGonagall went still when something genuinely surprised her. She read for 90 seconds. Then she took off her glasses, looked at him, put them back on, and read for another 30. "Who else knows?" she asked. "Granger and Weasley. Pomfrey. And now you. The headmaster?" "Not yet." Her eyes moved to his over the top of the scroll. "He'll need to be informed." "I know. I wanted to understand it first." She held his gaze for a moment and then, unexpectedly, she said, "That was the right instinct." She looked back at the scroll, and her voice, when she continued, had a layer of something carefully measured. Several of these contracts were filed during a period when the headmaster had broad magical guardianship authority over students orphaned by the war. He was legally empowered to make binding decisions for them. She paused. That authority was not intended to extend to permanent contractual obligations of this nature. "But it did," Harry said. "It did," she agreed, and the weight in it was answer enough. She looked at the Veela section last. He watched her jaw tighten. "Blood sovereignty tier," she read. "What does that mean?" "Practically." McGonagall set down the scroll. She looked at him with the expression of someone choosing her words the way you choose footing on unstable ground. "It means the Conclave's claim, if legally upheld under international compact law, would give them a form of magical custodianship over you. Not physical, you couldn't be physically compelled. But they could legally claim a seat in any decisions involving your magical development, education, allegiances." She paused. "It's the magical equivalent of a partial guardianship. Over my magic." "Yes. Without my consent. The original covenant was signed by your father under emergency provision while you were 1 year old," she said. "Your consent was not required under the law at the time. But," she leaned forward slightly, "the covenant also requires periodic reaffirmation under conclave law. A blood sovereignty covenant must be willingly accepted by the subject upon reaching magical majority." Harry went still. "Which is?" 15, McGonagall said. "Most magical communities counted at 15. She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "You are 16. So the covenant," Harry said slowly, "required me to accept it when I was 15. And no conclave representative was sent to secure that acceptance," McGonagall said. "Which means, under their own law, the covenant lapsed. Or it can be argued it lapsed. It's not clean, the blood sovereignty provisions are ancient and the legal interpretation is contested." She folded her hands on the desk. "But it is an argument. And it is a powerful one." The fire crackled. Outside the window, the grounds were going gold in the late afternoon light, the lake catching it, the mountains against the sky doing their ancient indifferent thing. "I'm going to need you," Harry said. "When this goes public, and it will go public, probably within 2 days, I'm going to need someone in this castle on my side who has actual authority." McGonagall looked at him for a long, measuring moment. "I have been," she said quietly, "on your side since you were 11 years old, Mr. Potter." "I know," he said. "But I'm asking now explicitly, because it's going to get complicated." She lifted her chin, that characteristic gesture that meant she'd made a decision. "Then I'll stand explicitly," she said. "But you'll tell me everything as it develops. No surprises." "Deal," Harry said. He gathered the folio and stood. At the door he paused, because there was one more thing. "The contracts that Dumbledore authorized," he said. "Did he know about the Veela covenant?" McGonagall was very quiet. That, she said finally, is a question I cannot answer for him. But you can answer whether he knew. A pause that lasted precisely long enough to be an answer. Go get some sleep, Potter. Tomorrow is going to be a complicated day. He nodded and went. The corridor outside her office was quiet, the torches going amber against the stone. He walked back toward Gryffindor Tower with the folio under his arm and the absolute certainty that tomorrow the dam was going to break, the water was going to come, and somewhere on the other side of the channel a Veela queen was going to hear the news that the scan had happened and that her covenant had been found among 100 others. He thought about what Pomfrey had said. Most people would have panicked. He rolled his shoulders and climbed the stairs. Let them come, he thought. Every single one of them. He'd been living inside other people's arrangements his entire life. It was time to start making his own. Chapter 2, The Queen arrives. The morning broke cold and sharp, the kind of September weather that couldn't decide if it was still summer or had already committed to autumn, and Harry was already awake when the owls came. Not just Hedwig returning. Owls, plural. A flood of them, hitting the great hall windows at breakfast like the sky had decided to deliver everything at once, barn owls and eagle owls and one spectacular white bird with gold-tipped wings that Harry had never seen before, which bypassed every other student at the Gryffindor table and landed directly in front of him with the bearing of something that had never in its life been told no. It dropped its letter. The envelope was deep blue, sealed with wax the color of old bone, and stamped with a mark Harry didn't recognize, a stylized bird in flight, wings spread impossibly wide, with a single word beneath it in French. Conclave. The great hall had that specific morning energy, 300 students and 7 teachers navigating toast and pumpkin juice and the social dynamics of a new term. Nobody was watching Harry specifically yet. That would change. He picked up the letter. Set it to one side. Opened Sirius's response first, because Sirius was the one who mattered right now. Sirius had written back in the middle of the night, which meant he'd been awake, which meant the owl had reached him fast, which meant Sirius had been somewhere close. The letter was short and vibrating with an energy Harry could feel through the parchment. Harry, read this 3 times and then burn it. I've already reached out to Charlotta Vance, who is the single most terrifying contract law specialist in Britain and possibly Europe. She handled the Greengrass knot contract dispute in 1988 and she once reduced a ministry official to tears in open Wiesengemot session using only a footnote. She'll be in contact by owl this afternoon. Do not respond to any contracts, any conclave communications, or anything from the headmaster's office until you've spoken to Charlotta. I cannot stress this enough. Also, I'm coming. Not yet, don't panic, I'm not going to make this worse, but I'm coming. Sit tight. Don't sign anything. Don't let anyone claim authority over this situation before Charlotta gets there. I love you. Also tell Hermione she's brilliant and that I said so. Padfoot. P.S. I already knew about the Greengrass contract. I didn't know about the others. I'm sorry. I should have checked sooner. P.P.S. Burn this letter. Harry read it twice. Didn't burn it yet. Pocketed it. Looked at the conclave envelope. Don't open it, Hermione said from beside him, without looking up from her own mail. She was reading something and eating toast simultaneously, a talent she developed over years of refusing to sacrifice breakfast for information. How did you know I was about to? Because you've been sitting there for 30 seconds doing the face you do when you're deciding whether to poke something. What face? The one where your jaw does the small thing. She turned a page. Sirius said don't respond to the conclave. Opening their letter constitutes a formal acknowledgement under international magical protocol. Don't. Ron looked up from his porridge. He'd been quieter than usual this morning, working through whatever he was working through about his mother, doing it privately the way Ron sometimes did. So they've already written. The quick owl with gold wing tips. Conclave seal. Harry turned the letter over in his hands. The wax seal was warm, slightly, in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. That's a compulsion charm on the seal, Hermione said, still not looking up. Low grade. It makes you want to open it. Don't. Harry set it face down on the table. The warmth persisted but he ignored it. They move fast. They've been monitoring the Covenant. She finally set down her reading material and looked at him fully. I was up most of the night going through the library's International Magical Law section. Harry, the Blood Sovereignty Covenant isn't just monitored, there's a standing detection charm embedded in it that activates when a formal diagnostic survey finds it. The moment Pomfrey's scan resolved that contract, it sent a signal. She paused. They've known about the scan since yesterday morning. Which means they've had 24 hours to, a sound cut through the Great Hall. Not loud exactly, but with a quality that made loud irrelevant, a resonance that moved through the stone of the castle the way deep sound moves through water, felt more than heard. Several people looked up. A first year at the Hufflepuff table actually stood on his chair to see over the heads in front of him. The doors to the Great Hall were already open, they usually were at breakfast, but they opened more, or seemed to, the way a room shifts when something significant enters it, the air pressure changing, the light adjusting. 3 women walked in. The first 2 flanked the third, and even understanding that they were guards, that their purpose was protective, did nothing to make them less remarkable. They were tall, moving with a precision that wasn't quite military but had the same quality of trained absolute certainty. Their hair was silver white, and their eyes, even from 50 feet away across the Great Hall, had that particular Veela quality that Fleur had always managed to tone down in public, a brightness that wasn't quite natural, that made the air around them feel charged. The third woman, the one they flanked, was the reason the room had gone quiet. Apollon Delacour was not what Harry had expected, which was his own fault for building an expectation. He'd assumed something ostentatious. Something that matched the letter with its bone-white seal and its compulsion charm. Instead she was, elegant was the wrong word, because elegant implied restraint and there was nothing restrained about her. She was compelling in the way that weather is compelling. You didn't choose to look at a thunderstorm because it was polite. You looked because it was there. She was dressed in deep gray and blue, which was not how Harry had imagined a Veela queen would dress, and her hair was the same silver blonde as Fleur's but worn up, severe, and her face was Fleur's face aged 15 years with more certainty built into it. She looked like someone who had given orders since before Harry was born and had never once received one she respected. She scanned the Great Hall. Her eyes moved in the systematic way of someone trained to assess a room, and they stopped on Harry with the absolute precision of someone who had always known exactly where he would be. Harry looked back. The Great Hall had gone from its standard breakfast noise to a hush that spread outward from her entrance like a stone dropped in still water. 300 students, 7 teachers, and approximately 250 different opinions about what to do next, all of them suspended in the particular quiet of people watching something happen that they don't have a script for. Apollon Delacour walked the length of the Great Hall. Her guards didn't walk behind her, they moved with her, flanking, 2 steps back, like the points of a triangle. She walked past the Slytherin table, past Hufflepuff, past Ravenclaw, and stopped in front of the Gryffindor table at the exact spot where Harry was sitting. He did not stand up. He picked up his pumpkin juice, took a sip, and met her eyes. They were silver, not blue, genuinely silver, the way the scales of certain magical fish were silver, lit from inside. "Harry Potter," she said. Her English was excellent, French accent precise and deliberate, each word placed the way you place something heavy with intent. "That's me," Harry said. Silence. She looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating on the spot, which he found satisfying in a quiet sort of way. "You were informed of the Covenant," she said. It wasn't a question. "Madame Pomfrey runs thorough scans," he agreed. "Then you understand why I am here." "I understand why you think you are here," Harry said. "Whether your reason and reality are the same thing is a different question." The silver eyes sharpened. Around them, the Great Hall had the specific quality of a room full of people trying very hard not to breathe loudly. "You are claiming," she said, slowly, as if testing the weight of each word, that the blood sovereignty covenant is invalid. I'm not claiming anything, Harry said. My solicitor will be making claims. I'm having breakfast. The silence stretched another beat. Then Apollon Delacour did something Harry hadn't expected. She sat down. Not across from him, where there was space, she sat beside him, at the Gryffindor table, as if she'd been invited, as if the bench had been kept for her. One of her guards took a standing position at the end of the table. The other remained at the hall door. Apollon looked at the food spread in front of her with detached assessment and then looked at Harry. "You are not afraid of me," she said. "Should I be? Most people are." She said it without pride or apology, as a simple statement of fact. "Even people who know what I am and have prepared themselves. I grew up with a Dark Lord trying to kill me," Harry said. "You're going to have to work harder than a compulsion charm on a letter seal." Her chin came up slightly. He had the distinct impression that she was not accustomed to being spoken to this way, and the further distinct impression that she wasn't entirely displeased by it. That was standard conclave correspondence protocol. The compulsion charm. A courtesy, to ensure important correspondence is read promptly. "Call it what you want," Harry said pleasantly. "My solicitor will call it an attempt at magical coercion, and I'd recommend against giving her more ammunition than she already has." Hermione, to Harry's left, had the expression of someone attending a performance they were thoroughly enjoying but were professionally obligated to remain neutral about. Ron, to his right, was eating his porridge with great concentration, which was his version of moral support. Apollon looked at Hermione. Then at Ron. Then back at Harry. "You already have legal representation." "I had it within 12 hours of finding out about the contracts." "Yes. The conclave will provide its own legal team. International treaty law is complex, and I suspect your British solicitor has limited experience with Charlotta Vance," Harry said, and watched Apollon Delacour go still. "You know the name." "She handled the Greengrass knot case," Apollon said, after a moment. "And about 400 other contract disputes, including several involving the conclave's boundary agreements with Northern European magical communities." Harry had read the briefing in Sirius's second letter, which had arrived with Hedwig 20 minutes before he came down to breakfast. "Sirius Black is my godfather. He knows people. The House of Black." Apollon's expression had become genuinely thoughtful. "I had not considered that dimension. Most people don't, with me. They see the scar and they think they understand the whole picture." She studied him. And for a moment, just a moment, the performance of certainty that she wore like armor shifted slightly, and underneath it Harry caught a glimpse of something more complicated. Not doubt exactly. More like the expression of someone who had arrived prepared for one conversation and found themselves in a different and more interesting one. "The other contracts," she said. 100 of them, stacked on top of the conclave's claim. "Yes. This is an offense against conclave sovereignty." Her voice had taken on a different quality, still controlled, but with something running beneath it that wasn't quite anger. More like righteous certainty finding its edge. "The blood sovereignty covenant predates every other contract on that survey by at minimum 8 years. To file binding agreements over it without conclave consent is theft," Harry said. "Your word, I assume. Given what you called me in the corridors yesterday." She blinked. "I did not, stolen property," Harry said. "I was told you used that phrase when you arrived." Apollon was quiet for a moment. "I used it in a legal context," she said. "It refers to the sovereignty violation, not to Madame Delacour." Harry set down his pumpkin juice and looked at her directly. "I understand that in the context of conclave law, the phrase means something specific and technical. I also understand that you are, right now, sitting at a table in my school telling me that I belong to your organization, and I want to be very clear with you about something before we go any further." She waited. "I don't belong to anyone," Harry said. "Not to you, not to the Death Eater families who filed contracts in 1979, not to Molly Weasley, not to Dumbledore, and not to whoever else thought they could write their name next to mine and call it a claim. I understand that you have a legal argument. I understand it might even be a strong one. But I need you to understand that I will fight it, and I will fight it completely, and I will not be impressed into compliance by Silver Eyes and Veela presence and ancient covenant language. He picked up his pumpkin juice again. Once we're both clear on that, we can have a productive conversation. The great hall was so quiet that the crackle of a torch at the far wall was audible. Apollon Delacour looked at Harry Potter for a long moment. The silver eyes were unreadable. Then, slowly, she said something in French, 2 words, low, not quite to him, as if she'd forgotten to keep the thought internal. Harry caught one of them. He'd heard it during the Triwizard Tournament, from Victor Crumb's notes, borrowed once to check a reference. Extraordinaire. I'll take that as a yes to productive conversation, Harry said. Something moved in her face that might, in different circumstances, have been the beginning of a smile. The meeting was relocated to McGonagall's office, because McGonagall appeared at the Great Hall entrance 20 minutes into the standoff with the expression of someone who had been informed by a prefect that there was a situation and had walked briskly to take control of it. She took in Apollon, the guards, Harry's expression, and the frozen state of 300 students in about 4 seconds. My office, she said. Now. Bring your people. Potter, Granger, Weasley, you as well. Nobody argued with McGonagall when she used that tone. Not even Veela Queens. Dumbledore arrived as they were filing out of the Great Hall. He came from the direction of the staircase, which meant someone had gone to get him, a prefect, probably, or a house ghost. He was wearing robes of dark blue that were slightly rumpled in a way that suggested haste disguised as serenity, and his eyes behind their half-moon glasses had that quality of alert attention that Harry had learned to read as Dumbledore taking inventory of a situation. Apollon, he said. His voice was warm, and Harry filed that away. They knew each other well enough for first names. This is unexpected. It should not be, Albus, she said, and her voice had shifted slightly from what it had been in the Great Hall. Harder. More formal. The scan was run. The covenant was registered. You know what that triggers. I know what the covenant says it triggers, Dumbledore said. The legal interpretation of that clause is, I think, more nuanced than, my solicitor is arriving this afternoon, Harry said. Both Dumbledore and Apollon looked at him. McGonagall, from slightly behind Dumbledore, did not look at him but he could see her shoulders straighten infinitesimally. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice had the warmth and weight of 6 years of relationship in it. I think it would be valuable to discuss this before we involve Charlotta Vance, Harry said. Sirius's choice. I'm told you've worked with her before, Headmaster. Dumbledore's expression didn't change, but something behind it recalibrated. I see that Sirius has been busy. He's my godfather. It's his job. Of course. Dumbledore smiled, the full, warm, concerned smile that Harry had once found completely reassuring and now found himself examining for its architecture. I only suggest that a conversation first, between people who care about you, might produce better outcomes than, some of those contracts have your signature on them, Harry said. Primary binding authority, not witness. That means a conversation between us about those contracts isn't between a student and a concerned adult, it's between a claimant and the subject of the claim. So I'd prefer to have my solicitor present for it. The warmth in Dumbledore's expression didn't disappear exactly. It became more careful. More deliberate. He looked at Harry for a long moment with something that might have been reassessment, or might have been the look of a very intelligent man processing the fact that the pieces on his board had moved without his instruction. Very well, he said quietly. We'll wait for Charlotta. McGonagall's hand on Harry's shoulder, brief, light, gone in a second, said everything she wasn't going to say out loud. McGonagall's office held 7 people uncomfortably and managed it with Scottish stubbornness. Apollon sat in the chair McGonagall had placed at the center, which was either a power move or a strategic retreat, and her guard stood at the door because McGonagall had firmly declined to have armed individuals inside her private space. Dumbledore sat to one side. Harry sat across from Apollon with Hermione and Ron flanking him, and McGonagall stood behind her desk and projected the energy of a woman who would tolerate exactly as much nonsense as she deemed appropriate. "You should know," Apollon said, once the door was shut, "that the Conclave has already filed formal notification with the International Confederation of Wizards. The scan results have been submitted as evidence of a sovereignty violation." "That was fast," Ron said. "The Conclave has been monitoring this covenant for 15 years, she said. The filing was prepared in advance." Apollon's silver eyes moved to Hermione with a new quality of attention. "That argument," Apollon said carefully, "assumes that the political circumstances at the time were normal. The subject was under active threat from, the covenant doesn't have an emergency extension clause," Hermione said. "I read it 3 times. If you'd like, I can show you the specific section." Harry watched Apollon look at Hermione the way you look at something you hadn't adequately prepared for. "Who are you?" "Hermione Granger. Harry's friend. She reads faster than anyone I've ever met," Ron added helpfully. Apollon looked at him. "And you?" "Ron Weasley. Also his friend. My mum also filed one of those contracts, so this is a bit of a complicated morning for me personally." "I see." Apollon returned to Harry. "Your friends are invaluable," Harry said simply. "Keep going, Hermione." Hermione did. She worked through the Veela Covenant's specific clauses with the precision of a surgeon, identifying the lapse argument, the missing reaffirmation, and 3 additional procedural irregularities that had come up in her overnight research. Dumbledore listened without interrupting, which was notable. He was watching Harry more than he was watching Hermione, and Harry held that gaze evenly when it found him, neither offering nor withdrawing anything. When Hermione finished, Apollon was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone defeated, more the silence of someone thinking hard. "Even if the reaffirmation lapse is accepted," she said, "the original covenant still carries weight. The Conclave's claim is not dependent solely on the covenant. There is also the matter of the sovereign tier classification." "What about it?" Harry asked. "It was assessed on the night of October 31, 1981. She held his gaze without apology. "Your magical capacity at that time, even at 1 year of age, was sufficient to register as sovereign tier. This was confirmed not by contract but by direct assessment. That classification does not expire." "What does it mean, practically, without the covenant?" McGonagall asked from behind her desk. "It means the Conclave has a standing interest in any magical entity classified at that tier, regardless of national jurisdiction." Apollon kept her eyes on Harry. "Your magic, Mr. Potter, is not simply powerful. It is structurally unusual in a way the Conclave has encountered only 4 times in recorded history. The sovereign tier assessment marks you as someone whose magical signature can affect compact magic, ancient bindings, covenants, blood oaths. Your presence in a room with active magical contracts is not neutral. Your intention toward those contracts matters in a way that it would not for an ordinary wizard." A beat of silence. "You're saying," Harry said, "that I can break the contracts?" "I'm saying," Apollon said carefully, "that the Conclave believes you may be able to do significantly more than break them." "We believe that with the right training, no," Harry said. She paused. "You haven't heard I don't need to. You're about to offer me Conclave training in exchange for accepting some form of their authority over my magic, and the answer is no." He leaned forward slightly. "Not because it isn't interesting. Because I'm not going to trade one set of people who think they own me for another." Apollon held his gaze. The silver eyes had a new quality in them now. She was reading him the way she'd probably read hundreds of people, looking for the lever, the angle, the pressure point. And he watched her not find one, and watched her register that, and watched something in her expression shift from assessment to something closer to genuine engagement. You broke a contract last night, she said quietly. Didn't you? The room went still. Harry didn't answer immediately. Hermione's quill had stopped moving. Which one? He asked. I don't know which one. I know that sometime between midnight and 3 in the morning, one of the active contracts on the survey ceased to be active. The monitoring charm registered the dissolution. She paused. It was clean. No legal challenge, no Wisengamot proceeding. It simply ceased. As if it had never been. She looked at his hands, briefly. What did you do? Harry thought about last night. About sitting on his bed after midnight with the folio open and the knot contract in his hands, the oldest of the Death Eater family contracts, the 1979 one, and the way the anger had been so clean and clear, and the way he'd held the document and thought this is not real, this was never real, this is ink on parchment and someone's assumption that my father's name was theirs to borrow. And the way the contract had simply gone dark between his hands, the magic unraveling out of it like thread pulled from the end of a seam. He'd stared at it for a long time afterward. Then he'd put it down and gone to sleep. I disagreed with it, Harry said. Apollon Delacour looked at him for a long moment. Outside the window, the grounds were bright and cold, the September light hitting the castle walls at a low angle that made the stone look like hammered gold. Mon Dieu, she said softly, again not quite to him. I can do that to all of them, Harry said. Can't I? She didn't answer immediately. What she did instead was something Harry hadn't expected. She stood, and from inside her robes she produced a slim document sealed in deep blue wax, and she set it on McGonagall's desk without looking away from Harry. That, she said, is the formal conclave sovereignty claim. It has been prepared and it is ready to file with the International Confederation. She paused. I am choosing not to file it today. Why? McGonagall asked. Because filing it starts a process that cannot be easily stopped and produces outcomes that I am no longer certain I want. She looked at Harry. I came here expecting to find a young man who needed to be explained to. Who needed to be guided. And instead you found? Harry said. Someone who broke a binding contract in his sleep, she said, using nothing but his personal objection to its existence. She walked to the door. One of her guards opened it from the outside. She turned back, one hand on the doorframe. I will be staying in Hogsmeade for the next several days, she said. My solicitor and yours will need to meet. There are still 100 outstanding contracts on that survey, Mr. Potter, and they will not all dissolve quietly in the night. Some of them have claimants who are considerably less willing to reconsider than I am. She paused. And several of those claimants will be arriving shortly, because the monitoring charm on the Conclave Covenant is not the only charm on that survey. Every house with a registered binding will have been notified of the scan. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. How long? Hermione asked. The farthest claimants are in Eastern Europe. Perhaps 48 hours. The British ones, Apollon's expression was something between pragmatic and apologetic, some of them were notified before I arrived. Which means they've had as long as I have, and they are considerably less reasonable. Who specifically? Dumbledore asked, and for the first time in the meeting, his voice had lost the warmth and become something more measured. Not, Apollon said. Crabbe. Avery. She paused. And Lord Rosier, who has a 1981 filing and who is, I believe, currently in ministry custody on a related charge. He's applied for emergency release on grounds of a pending contract matter. She looked at Harry. Some of these men were Death Eaters, Mr. Potter. They filed contracts on you when they thought your side would lose. I know, Harry said. They're not coming to negotiate, she said. I know that too, Harry said. She looked at him for one final moment. How are you not afraid, she asked, and it was the first time since she'd walked into the great hall that she sounded genuinely curious rather than strategic. Because being afraid of them gives them power they haven't earned, Harry said. And I don't hand out things I haven't decided to give. Apollon Delacour left. The door closed behind her and her guards, and the room held its silence for a moment. Then Ron exhaled. "Bloody hell," he said, comprehensively. "Language, Weasley," McGonagall said, but it was automatic, her mind clearly elsewhere. Dumbledore had risen from his chair. He was looking at Harry with the expression that Harry had come to think of as his real one, not the warm grandfather performance, but the face underneath it, the one that was brilliant and calculating and genuinely, deeply convinced that it knew best. "Harry," he said. "Not yet," Harry said. "Not without Charlotta." Dumbledore closed his mouth. He nodded once, very slightly, with the grace of a man accepting a chess move he respected even as he began countering it. "Very well," he said. "But Harry, the claimants who are coming. They are not all like Apollon. She is at least, reasonable." Harry said. "She just told me some of them were Death Eaters." "Yes." "Good," Harry said. "I'd rather know who I'm dealing with." He picked up his bag from beside the chair. Hermione already had hers on her shoulder. Ron was finishing the last of his coffee with the focused energy of a man fueling up for something. "Charlotta Vance arrives this afternoon," Harry said, to the room in general. "I'd like to have a proper meeting this evening. Everyone who has a stake in this, and I mean everyone, including the headmaster, in one room, with her present." He looked at Dumbledore. "Including a full explanation of the 3 contracts you signed with primary binding authority. Tonight." Dumbledore held his gaze. The blue eyes behind the glasses were very still. "Tonight," he agreed. Harry nodded and walked out into the corridor, and didn't let anyone see the way his hands, just briefly, in the privacy of motion, had curled into fists at his sides. Not from fear. From the effort of holding the anger in its clean and useful shape instead of letting it become something hot and wasteful. Behind him he heard Hermione murmur something to Ron, and Ron murmur something back, and McGonagall's door closed with a precise click. The castle around him was enormous and old and full of people who were about to find out that the scan had happened. By tonight every student in the building would know. By tomorrow, the wizarding world would. And Death Eater families with binding contracts were already on their way. He took the stairs 2 at a time and went to find somewhere quiet to think, and the folio warm against his chest had 99 contracts left in it, and he was already working through what came next. Fleur Delacour found him in the library at noon. She was there visiting her mother. Harry had forgotten she was in England, working at Gringotts' London branch now, though, visiting her mother, was probably the most complicated family reunion anyone was having this week. She was wearing work robes, silver grey, her white blonde hair down, and she had her mother's certainty in her posture but something softer in her face. She sat across from him without asking if she could join him, which was a habit Harry remembered from the Triwizard Tournament. Fleur Delacour did not ask permission for things she'd already decided to do. "I heard what you said to she said. Her English was excellent, the accent more controlled than her mother's. "In the ball." "Good morning, Fleur," Harry said. "She came here expecting to collect you," Fleur said. There was something in her voice that wasn't quite the tone she usually used with him, the slightly superior, slightly amused tone of someone who'd always been the most impressive person in the room. This was something more honest. Like a missing piece that had been misplaced. "I know. It bothered you." "It bothered me," he agreed. She looked at the folio open on the table in front of him. "Is this the list?" He turned it so she could see the top of the survey. She read the header, and her expression did the same thing Pomfrey's had done, and McGonagall's, and Ron's, that specific recalibration of someone finding the situation larger than expected. 101, she said. 100 now. I took care of the knot contract. She looked at him. You, what? I broke it, he said simply. Last night. Fleur was quiet for a moment. My mother told me about the sovereign tear, she said. She told me what it means. What you can do with it. She paused. She does not tell me everything, but she told me that. She looked at him with something he recognized as a kind of reluctant honesty. Are you going to break the conclave covenant too? That depends, Harry said. On what? On whether your mother decides to be an obstacle or he considered the word, a variable. Fleur made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something less comfortable. She is always a variable, she said. She does not do anything simply. She looked at the table for a moment. The men who are coming, Potter. The ones from the Death Eater families. You should know, Rosier's petition for emergency release was denied this morning. My mother's legal team filed an objection, actually. Harry looked up. Why? Because if a Death Eater arrives to claim a contract on the Veela Conclave's designated sovereign, it becomes a conclave matter as well as a British one. She met his gaze steadily. She is not your enemy. I know, Harry said. She's something more complicated than an enemy. Those are harder. Fleur studied him. In the tournament she had looked through him the way beautiful people sometimes look through people they've categorized as beneath their attention. She wasn't looking through him now. You are not what I expected, she said. People keep saying that to me today. Perhaps people have been expecting the wrong things for a long time. He smiled at that, genuinely. Maybe. She stood to go, but paused. My mother asked me to give you something, she said, and produced a small card from her robes, just a card, cream-colored, no seal, no compulsion charm, just her mother's handwriting in neat dark ink. An address in Hogsmeade. A time. Domain Madden. 8 o'clock. Come alone if you wish. Come with your solicitor if you prefer. But come. She's asking now, Harry observed. Yes, Fleur said. She is. He pocketed the card. Fleur walked away between the shelves, her silver robes going quiet in the library hush. Harry looked down at the folio. 100 names. Death Eaters incoming. A solicitor arriving this afternoon. A meeting tonight. A Veela queen reconsidering her position in a pub in Hogsmeade. He turned to a fresh piece of parchment and began to write. Chapter 3, The woman with the footnote. Charlotta Vance arrived at 4:15 in the afternoon in a ministry-approved portkey that deposited her directly in McGonagall's office, which was either a sign of significant ministry connections or significant ministry intimidation, and Harry suspected both. She was not what he'd pictured. He'd built someone from Sirius's description, most terrifying contract law specialist in Britain, and had landed somewhere in the vicinity of stern, grey-haired, formidable. What he got instead was a woman in her mid-40s with dark skin and close-cropped hair going silver at the temples, dressed in robes that were deeply, deliberately unremarkable, the kind of unremarkable that took effort. She carried a single briefcase, battered brown leather, and when she set it on McGonagall's desk it landed with the particular solidity of something that contained more than its size suggested. She looked at Harry for exactly 2 seconds. You've already broken one, she said. The not contract, Harry confirmed. Using personal objection. She held his gaze for another beat. Show me. He picked up the crab contract from the folio, he'd been working through them in chronological order, oldest first, and held it in both hands. He looked at it. The magic in it was a specific texture, he'd noticed, since the first one, like old rope soaked in something unpleasant, the binding intent woven through it in a way that felt both deliberate and brittle. The not contract had dissolved when he'd held it and simply refused it, refused its premise, its authority, its claim on him at a fundamental level. Refused it with the part of his magic that was apparently, according to Apollon Delacour, structurally unusual. The crab contract took 4 seconds. The binding went dark and came apart, and the parchment didn't burn or crumble, it just became ordinary paper, the magic emptying out of it the way air leaves a room when you open a window. Charlotta watched this with the focus of a surgeon watching a new procedure. Interesting, she said. She did not sound alarmed. She sounded like someone adding a data point to a working theory. Can he do it to all of them? Hermione asked from her seat at the side of the room. She had notebooks. Plural. Theoretically, yes. Practically, Charlotta opened her briefcase and began extracting files with the efficiency of someone who'd been organizing her thoughts since the moment Sirius's owl reached her. It depends on the binding tier of each contract. The ones with ministerial oath are more complex. The ancient house contracts have additional protections. The Veela covenant is in a class of its own. She looked at Harry. The ones you can simply dissolve, do it. Don't wait for legal process. Every one you break before the claimants arrive is one less lever they hold. That was my plan, Harry said. Good plan. She sat down. Now. Tell me everything. I read Sirius's summary, but I want it from you, from the beginning, including anything you haven't told him. Harry told her. All of it, the scan, Pomfrey's face, the scroll, the Veela covenant's date, the conversation in the library with Hermione, the meeting this morning, Apollin's visit, the card from Fleur. Charlotta listened without interrupting, writing occasional notes in a shorthand so compressed it looked decorative. When he finished, she read back through her notes once, tapped her pen against the desk 3 times, and said, 3 problems, in decreasing order of urgency. First, the claimants. Second, Dumbledore. Third, the Veela Covenant's sovereign tier classification, which is not actually a contract problem at all. What is it? Harry asked. A political one, she said. And politics is messier than law. She opened a file. The claimants who are incoming, I've already filed preliminary injunctions with both the Wisingamat and the ICW blocking any enforceability action while the survey is under active legal challenge. That gives us a procedural buffer. Nobody can physically compel anything while the injunctions hold. She looked up. What it doesn't do is stop them from arriving. And some of these families are going to arrive with the intention of making a scene that becomes public record, because public record creates pressure. Let them, Harry said. Charlotta studied him. Most clients at this stage want containment strategies. I'm not interested in containing it. I'm interested in winning it. He met her gaze steadily. Let them come and make their scenes. Every scene is evidence. Every public claim is a claimant on the record, and every claimant on the record is someone I get to respond to. A beat. Then Charlotta said, Sirius told me you were something different. I thought he was being a fond godfather. He's also that, Harry said. She allowed something in her face that wasn't quite a smile. The Dumbledore problem, she said, moving on with the efficiency of someone who had learned not to waste time being charmed by clients. 3 contracts with his primary binding authority. I've read all 3. The Greengrass one is the most legally substantial. It's a full Wisingamat filing with a maturation clause, which means it activates on your 17th birthday, 11 months from now. The other 2 are in a legal gray area that I'm fairly confident I can challenge, but the Greengrass contract, she paused, is solid work. Whoever helped him draft it knew exactly what they were doing. Can we break it the same way? Ron asked. He'd been quiet since they'd come in, sitting with his arms folded and his jaw set, which was his working posture when he was absorbing difficult information and refusing to be overwhelmed by it. The magical dissolution will work regardless of the legal complexity, Hermione said. The question is whether breaking it legally protects Harry or creates additional liability. She's right, Charlotta said, and Hermione glowed faintly in the way she always did when someone who knew their subject confirmed her thinking. Breaking it magically removes the binding but doesn't nullify the legal claim. Dumbledore could go to the Wisingamat and argue that the dissolution was itself a breach. He won't, Harry said. How are you certain? Because filing that argument puts his signature on a contract he authorized for a minor student under his guardianship in front of the Wisingamat, Harry said. He won't want that light on it. Charlotta looked at him for a moment. You understand him. I've had 6 years to study him. That's useful. She made a note. All right. My recommendation on the Greengrass contract, don't dissolve it yet. Hold it. It's leverage. Harry frowned. I thought the point is to win, not to win fast, she said. If you dissolve it tonight, before the meeting, you lose the ability to make Dumbledore's cooperation the price of its dissolution. Leave it intact, put it on the table tonight, and let him know that the contract goes either by his hand or by yours, and if it goes by yours you'll be filing a full account of its origin with the Wisengamot records. She closed the file. That's the footnote play. Ron blinked. The what? There's a story, Hermione said, with the slightly guilty look of someone who had researched the person they were about to meet, about you reducing a ministry official to tears with a footnote. Charlotta did smile then, small and precise. Senior Undersecretary Fortescue. He'd buried an illegal contract clause in Note 14 of a 40-page agreement. I found it. I read it into the Wisengamot record during the opposing party's rebuttal period. She paused. He cried at Note 17. What was in Note 17? Ron asked. His signature, she said simply. The footnote play is always the same, you don't fight the document someone wants you to fight. You make them fight the document they forgot they signed. She looked at Harry. Dumbledore has forgotten, or is choosing to forget, what his signature looks like on those 3 contracts. Tonight we remind him. The meeting was set for 8 in the evening in the room that McGonagall had commandeered from its normal use as a staff records room, large enough for a proper table, private enough for a frank conversation, far enough from the student dormitories that raised voices wouldn't carry. Harry spent the 3 hours before it working through the folio. He sat in the dormitory with the curtains drawn and Hermione's annotated list beside him, going through the contracts in the order she'd categorized them: dissolve immediately, hold for leverage, complex handle with Charlotta. The dissolve immediately pile was the largest, 43 contracts from families with no legal standing, improper filings, missing conditions, or simply the kind of magical binding that crumbled under genuine refusal because it had never had the subject's consent built into its structure. He worked through them steadily. Each one took between 3 seconds and about 2 minutes, depending on the binding tier. Most of them were paper and resentment, contracts that had been filed in the hope of something but without the magical investment that made them truly binding. They dissolved the way bad spell work dissolved, not dramatically, just quietly, the pretense leaving them. A few were harder. One from the Knott family's secondary branch had a bloodlock on it that resisted, and Harry held it for nearly 4 minutes while it tried to maintain its grip and he simply refused to acknowledge that grip is real. It came apart finally like a knot that's been pulled from both ends, the bloodlock releasing with a feeling that was less like snapping and more like something giving up. He set it down and flexed his hands. You all right? Ron asked from his bed, not looking up from the chess puzzle he was working. Fine, Harry said. These ones that have blood locks, they're tiring. How many of those? 7 on the dissolve list. Another 4 on the complex list. Harry rolled his neck. The ones from the Death Eater families tend to have them. Because they knew a simple filing wouldn't hold if you ever contested it. Because they were binding documents in a world where they expected to win a war, Harry said. They built them to last. He picked up the next one. They just didn't account for the person they were binding having opinions about it. Ron moved a chess piece. Made in 3, he said to himself, studying the board. Then, without looking up, I wrote to Mum. Harry set down the contract he'd been about to start. Yeah. Told her I'd read her letter. Told her I understood why she did it. Told her she should have asked you. He moved another piece, considering. She wrote back in about 20 minutes, which means she'd been waiting. He paused. She's sorry. She's genuinely sorry, Harry. It came from, she loves you. You know she does. I know, Harry said. That doesn't make it all right, no, Harry said. But it makes it, survivable. Between us. He looked at the contract in his hands, then set it down and looked at Ron properly. I'm not angry at her. I'm angry at the situation. There's a difference. Ron nodded slowly. Yeah. Okay. He moved the final chess piece. Mate. Harry picked the contract back up. Her filing, he said carefully. I'm going to dissolve it. The binding on it is simple, it's a one-condition betrothal intent, standard form, no blood work. It'll come apart in about 10 seconds. He paused. I just wanted you to know I'm going to do it, and why? Because it's yours to dissolve, Ron said. Not a question. Because it's mine to dissolve. Ron nodded again. Do it, then. Harry held the contract. Read Molly Weasley's name in her round handwriting on the signatory line, 1993, filed with care and a mother's anxiety and the best of intentions. He held it and was not angry at Molly Weasley, and the contract knew it, because the contract was built on an assumption of ownership and there was no ownership here to sustain it. It dissolved in 8 seconds. The parchment became ordinary. He folded it neatly and set it to one side. Done, he said. Good, Ron said. They sat in comfortable quiet for a moment, the way they did in the dormitory sometimes, two people who'd been friends long enough that silence didn't need to be filled. 48 left in the folio, Harry said. Ron whistled low. How many do you think you can get through before 8? Harry picked up the next contract. Let's find out, he said. He arrived at the meeting with 62 contracts dissolved and 39 remaining. Charlotta was already at the table when he came in, briefcase open, files sorted with architectural precision. Hermione sat beside her, and they were already talking in the quiet rapid way of two people who'd discovered a shared level of rigor and were enjoying it. McGonagall was at the head of the table with a pot of tea she was managing to make look institutional. Dumbledore arrived last. He came in without his usual theatrical warmth, just came in and sat down and folded his hands on the table, and Harry looked at him and thought about the conversation he needed to have with this man tonight and felt the clean anger settle into something useful. Thank you all for being here, Charlotta said, without any preamble, and everyone understood the meeting had started. I'm Charlotta Vance, acting as Mr. Potter's legal counsel. I've reviewed the contract survey in full. I have injunctions filed with both the Wisengamot and the ICW blocking enforceability actions during active challenge, and I have a preliminary challenge document ready for submission. She looked around the table. The purpose of tonight's meeting is not to debate the existence of the contracts. It is to establish, clearly, how each person in this room is related to them. She opened a file. I'll start with the straightforward ones. Professor Weasley, your filing. It's been dissolved. McGonagall's eyebrows moved. I wasn't aware, not present Weasley, Charlotta said. The contract filed in 1993 by Molly Weasley was dissolved this afternoon by Mr. Potter. It no longer exists as a binding document. If Mrs. Weasley wishes to discuss the circumstances of its original filing, she may contact my office. She moved to the next file. The 14 contracts from Death Eater-affiliated families, 27 have been dissolved as of this afternoon. The remaining 7 have blood locks which will require, he's dissolving them himself, Dumbledore said. Quietly. Not as an objection exactly. Yes, Charlotta said. The blood locks are complex magic. He's managing, Charlotta said, with the finality of someone drawing a line. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Harry looked back. There was something in the headmaster's face, not quite concern, not quite something else. It was the look of a man watching a situation he thought he'd understood reveal itself to be different, and processing that with his characteristic intelligence. You can actually break them, Dumbledore said. Not to the room. To Harry. I had theories, but I wasn't certain. Your mother's protection, the magic she left in you, combined with the natural resonance of your core, Albus, Charlotta said, and her voice had a quality that Harry imagined had preceded the moment Under Secretary Fortescue cried. "I'm going to ask you directly about the 3 contracts carrying your primary binding authority. I would prefer you answer directly. The question is simple: did you authorize those contracts with Mr. Potter's long-term welfare as your primary consideration, or with a secondary consideration that you weighted more heavily?" The room was very still. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. He looked at his folded hands. When he looked up his eyes were direct, and this was the thing about Dumbledore that Harry had always found simultaneously admirable and infuriating, completely honest. He didn't lie. He just arranged the truth in ways that served his purposes. "I authorized those contracts," he said, "because I believed, and still believe, that Harry's future needed stability. That tying him to established wizarding houses created a framework of protection. People with contracts have incentive to protect their investments." He paused. "I also believed that ensuring his eventual alliances were with light-aligned families was preferable to leaving those alliances to chance." "You decided who I'd marry," Harry said. Not angrily. Just stating it. "I made provisions," Dumbledore said. "In the same way I've made provisions for your safety, your education, without asking me. You were 11. 12. 13. Dumbledore's voice was even. "The decisions were made before you were old enough to. The Greengrass contract has a maturation clause that activates in 11 months, Harry said. "I'm 16. You could have told me this year. You could have told me last year. You could have told me at any point and asked me what I wanted." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "You didn't." Dumbledore was quiet. "Because if you'd asked me," Harry said, "I would have said no." "Yes," Dumbledore said, "and the honesty of it landed harder than any evasion would have." "You would have." McGonagall made a sound. Harry didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Dumbledore and let the admission sit where it had fallen. "I'm going to dissolve all 3 of your contracts," Harry said. "The Greengrass one last, because it's the most complex. I'll give you until the end of this week to inform the Greengrass family yourself. That's the professional courtesy I'm extending. After that I dissolve it regardless." He paused. "What I'm asking for in return is your cooperation with the remaining 46 contracts I haven't dealt with yet. Specifically, any legal authority that's being channeled through your guardianship position that's keeping those contracts active." Dumbledore studied him. "You're asking me to step back from my guardianship role?" "Legally," Harry said. "In the specific context of contracts and alliances. I'm not asking you to stop being my headmaster." A long pause. Charlotta was perfectly still beside him, not intervening, letting Harry work, and Harry understood she'd read the room accurately when she'd chosen not to lead this part. "There are things I have kept from you," Dumbledore said finally, "because I was afraid. Not of you. Of the weight of it. Of asking a young man to carry knowledge that would." "I know," Harry said. "We'll deal with that separately. Tonight I just need you to agree to this." Dumbledore looked at him for one more moment. Then he reached into his robes and produced a quill. He signed the document that Charlotta smoothly produced and placed in front of him, the legal relinquishment of guardianship authority in matters of contractual obligation, with the neat, precise signature that Harry had seen on 3 contract authorizations in the folio and would not see there again. "Done," Charlotta said, and pocketed the document before anything could change. "Done," Dumbledore agreed. He sat back. And then, unexpectedly, he said, "I am sorry, Harry. For these specific things. Not for everything. But for these." Harry nodded once. "I know," he said. "We'll deal with the rest of it later." They would. But not tonight. The Death Eaters' representatives arrived the next morning. Not the Death Eaters themselves. Most of the ones who'd filed contracts were either imprisoned or on ministry watch lists that prevented them from approaching Hogwarts. What arrived instead were their solicitors, and their adult children, and in one case an elderly aunt who appeared to have been dispatched as a more respectable proxy, and they arrived at the Hogwarts gates at 8 in the morning with the collective energy of people who believed they were owed something. Harry heard about it from a fifth-year Gryffindor who came sprinting into the Great Hall during breakfast with the specific breathlessness of someone delivering important news. There were 7 people at the gates, the fifth-year said. 7 people who'd sent an owl to the headmaster requesting formal access to discuss contract matters. Harry looked at Charlotta across the table. They can't come in without an invitation, Charlotta said. The castle wards, Dumbledore has to approve entry, Hermione said. Which means, Harry said, standing up, we should be there when he does. They were. Dumbledore was already at the gates when Harry arrived with Charlotta and Hermione and Ron, and the 7 people on the other side of the wrought iron were a fascinating cross-section of wizarding venality. 2 solicitors in expensive robes carrying briefcases that made Charlotta's look deliberately understated. 3 men who had the family resemblance of Death Eater-adjacent upbringing, not marked, not overt, but with something in the posture, a specific quality of entitlement that came from decades of assuming the world organized itself around their preferences. The elderly aunt Harry had heard about, who was wearing an extraordinary hat and regarding Hogwarts with the expression of someone who found the architecture insufficient. And, last, a young woman of about 20 with dark hair and carefully neutral eyes who Harry didn't recognize until she introduced herself. Astoria Greengrass, she said. Daphne's sister. I've been asked to represent the family's interests. Harry looked at her. She was 3 or 4 years older than he was, and she'd come alone without a solicitor, and she was looking at him not with the entitlement of the others but with something more complicated. More honest. Your family was approached by Dumbledore, Harry said. Not a question. My family was approached by a representative of the headmaster in 1999, before I was old enough to know what it meant. She held his gaze. My sister has known about this contract since she was 14. She has never, she paused. She has never wanted it. I'm here to make that formally known. Noted, Charlotta said, producing a form from her briefcase with the speed of a conjurer. If Miss Daphne Greengrass is willing to sign a formal disclaimer, she'll sign it today, Astoria said. We came to end this, not extend it. Harry nodded at her. She nodded back, with the precise economy of 2 people who understood each other without needing to make a production of it. The other 6 were considerably less civilized about it. The lead solicitor, a wide man named Parks with the ruddy face of someone who expected every room to accommodate him, opened with the kind of measured legal language that was designed to sound reasonable while meaning something completely unreasonable. He talked about established contractual rights, about binding obligations, about the legal status of pre-birth covenant agreements under the Heritage Provisions Act. He talked for 4 minutes without interruption, which was apparently 3 minutes and 50 seconds more than Charlotta felt was warranted. The Heritage Provisions Act of 1953, she said, specifies that pre-birth betrothal contracts are valid only when filed between 2 parties both carrying ancient house status as defined by the Wisengamot Registry. Of the 7 families your clients collectively represent, 2 hold ancient house status. The other 5 filed under an expanded interpretation that was ruled invalid by the Wisengamot in 1967. Those 5 contracts are legally void regardless of magical binding. She paused. Would you like to see the 1967 ruling? I have it. She produced it. She'd had it tabbed. The specific tab was bright red, which Harry noticed, and suspected was not an accident. Parks read the ruling. His face went through several shades during this process. The 2 ancient house contracts, Charlotta continued, while he was still reading, have been dissolved by Mr. Potter under his right of magical autonomy, which is recognized under both British and international magical law as superseding contract rights in cases where the subject was a minor at the time of filing and was not represented in the agreement. She paused again. The magical dissolution was recorded this morning. I have the certification. She produced that too. As of 7:42 this morning, those contracts no longer exist as binding documents. You can't, one of the other men started. He can, Charlotta said pleasantly. Shall I read you the applicable statute? I have that tabbed as well. The elderly aunt said something under her breath in what might have been Latin that was almost certainly not complimentary. Harry looked at her and she looked back at him with sharp, dark eyes that were more honest than the rest of her ensemble suggested. Your family's contract is one of the 5 void ones, Harry said to her directly. It's been legally unenforceable since 1967. You came here knowing that. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, very precisely, my nephew is an idiot. Most people who filed these contracts were, Harry said. She made a sound that was half contempt and half amusement and turned, and said something to her attendant, and left, and her hat was extraordinary from behind as well. The solicitors stayed another 20 minutes doing the things solicitors did when they'd lost the legal argument, which was to look for procedural grounds while giving the impression of considering a negotiated settlement. Charlotta handled it with the expression of a chess master watching someone try to play checkers on her board. Harry stood beside her and said nothing because Charlotta had told him that silence in these situations was its own kind of pressure, and he was good at silence. When Parks finally left, his exit the practiced retreat of someone filing new strategies as he walked, Harry looked around. The gate area was empty except for his own group. Astoria Greengrass was still there, slightly to the side, holding a folded piece of parchment. Daphne's disclaimer, she said. Charlotta took it, read it, nodded. This is sufficient. I'll have the dissolution certification back to you by end of week. Astoria looked at Harry. She's not, she paused. She's not sorry about the contract being dissolved. I want to be clear about that. But she would like you to know that she doesn't, that it was never her choice to. I know, Harry said. Tell her I know. Astoria nodded once. She had that same economical quality as her interaction at the gate, no waste in it, no drama. She turned to leave and then stopped. Avery is still coming, she said. I heard it on the way here. He's petitioning for emergency proxy release from his handler. He's under supervised ministry conditions, not full imprisonment. He has a barrister who's argued he can attend contract proceedings in person. She looked at Harry. He's not like the others. He filed his contract in 1980 because he expected your side to lose, and when you didn't, she paused, choosing words. He's been waiting 25 years for leverage over the boy who lived. He's not coming to negotiate. What's he coming to do? Ron asked. Make a claim in front of witnesses, Astoria said. Get it on record. Make noise. Force the ministry to either recognize the contract or rule publicly on its invalidity, which either way puts Harry Potter in front of the press as someone with Death Eater families filing marriage claims. She looked at Harry. He doesn't care about the girl. He cares about the humiliation. Thank you, Harry said. She left. Harry looked at Charlotta. He can't enforce anything, Charlotta said. The contract is dissolved. Magically and legally, as of this morning. But the press doesn't know that, Hermione said. If he files a public claim before we can get the dissolution on record in a visible way, we get ahead of it, Harry said. How? Harry thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. We give the press something bigger, he said. We give them the whole picture. Not just the Avery contract, all of it. The full survey, the names, the Death Eaters, Dumbledore's signatures, the Veela covenant. He looked at Charlotta. Is there any legal reason I can't go public with the survey results? You are the subject of the survey. It's your information to disclose. She considered. Timing matters. If you release before Avery files, you control the narrative. If he files first, you're responding. Then we release today, Harry said. Today, Charlotta repeated, and the small precise smile was back. I know a journalist. Not Rita Skeeter, Hermione said immediately. Not Rita Skeeter, Charlotta confirmed. Someone who doesn't manufacture facts. Someone who'll print exactly what the documents say, with all the names. She paused. Including Dumbledore's. A beat. He agreed to cooperate, Harry said. This is cooperation. The public knowing what he signed is how those 3 contracts stop existing as political leverage. He looked toward the castle. He might not like it. He doesn't have to like it, Charlotta said. He agreed. Harry looked up at the castle, its towers, its weight of centuries, the way it sat in the Scottish landscape with the absolute confidence of something that had been there long enough not to need to justify itself. He'd spent 6 years inside it, being shaped by it. Being protected by it. Being arranged by it. Run it, he said. He found Dumbledore before Charlotta found her journalist. Not to ask permission. He'd been clear about that. He went to the headmaster's office because Dumbledore deserved to hear it from him directly, the same professional courtesy he'd offered about the Greengrass contract. Dumbledore was sitting behind his desk, and the portraits of previous headmasters were doing their usual ambient observation, and Fawkes was on his perch looking at Harry with the particular quality of attention that phoenix gazes had, the feeling of being seen past your surfaces. "I'm releasing the full survey to the press today," Harry said. "Before Avery can file a public claim." Dumbledore looked at him. "Including my signatures." "Including your signatures." A long pause. The office did its quiet breathing thing, the instruments, the ambient magic, the old accumulated sound of 1,000 years of decisions made in this room. "I would ask you to consider," Dumbledore began. "I have considered," Harry said. "It's the right move." "The public reaction will be loud," Harry said. "Yes. But loud about the right things." He stood in front of the desk and looked at Dumbledore directly. "People have been filing contracts on me since I was born. Death Eaters and well-meaning friends and ancient Veela queens and you. All of them decided something about me without asking. I'm asking you now, formally, directly, to let this be the moment when that stops. Let me control this narrative. Let the world see exactly what was done and who did it. And take the consequences," Dumbledore said. "And take the consequences," Harry agreed. "Together." Another long pause. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression that Harry was beginning to understand was the headmaster's real engagement, not the warm grandfather, not the careful strategist, but the man underneath both, the one who was genuinely brilliant and genuinely tried to do right and genuinely, deeply fallible in the ways that brilliant people who loved too much and controlled too hard were fallible. "All right," Dumbledore said quietly. "Together." Harry turned to go. "Harry," Dumbledore said. He stopped. "When I assessed your potential, in the early years, after your parents," Dumbledore's voice was careful. "I always knew you would be extraordinary. I allowed that knowledge to make decisions for me that you should have been making yourself." He paused. "That is the thing I am most sorry for." Harry stood with his hand on the door for a moment. "I know," he said. "And then, because it was true and fair and the balance of it mattered, you also kept me alive to have the chance to be angry about it. That counts." He left the office and went back down the stairs, and by the time he reached the bottom, Charlotta's owl was already in the air with a sealed package for a journalist named Philip Baines at the Wizarding Tribune, and by nightfall the whole of Wizarding Britain was going to know that 101 marriage contracts had been found on Harry Potter, and every name attached to every one of them would be on record. Let them come, he thought. Let all of them come. He had 39 contracts left to dissolve, a Veela queen to meet for breakfast tomorrow morning, and a very satisfying sense that the ground was finally shifting under the right people. Chapter 4, What the Blood Knows. The Wizarding Tribune hit doorsteps at 6 in the morning. Harry knew because he was already awake, sitting at the dormitory window watching the owl post arrive over the grounds in the early grey light, and the specific density of it, the sheer number of owls converging on the school from every direction like a weather system, told him the article had landed the way a stone lands in water. Not the ripple kind. The kind where the stone is very large and the water has nowhere else to go. He dressed. Went down to the common room. Picked up the copy that a prefect had already collected from the owl drop and left on the table, the front page facing up. The headline read, 101, the full survey. Philip Baines had done exactly what Charlotta promised, printed the documents. All of them. The survey header, the binding classifications, the signatory lines. Every name in full. The Death Eater families in a column on the left side of the page that read like a war crimes index. Dumbledore's 3 contracts in a separate section, with a short factual statement from Charlotta's office about the relinquishment of guardianship authority signed the previous evening. The Veela Conclave Covenant in its own box, translated in full, with the date, October 31, 1981, in bold. The article itself was short. Baines had let the documents do the talking. At the bottom, a single-line statement attributed to Harry Potter, these contracts were signed without my knowledge or consent. I have begun the process of dissolving each one. I am not anyone's property. Hermione had written that last sentence at Harry's request, because she had a gift for compression that he'd always admired. Harry set the paper down, made himself a cup of tea from the dormitory kettle, and sat in the early quiet of the common room while the castle slowly woke up around him. By 7 o'clock the mail was continuous. The great hall at breakfast had the quality of a room that had been electrified. 300 students who'd all read the paper or been told about it by someone who had, doing the specific social dance of public knowledge, the careful loudness of people discussing something enormous while being very aware of who is in the room. Harry sat in his usual spot and ate his toast and did not perform nonchalance, because performing it would have been obvious. He was simply not bothered by the attention, which was different, and took a kind of internal architecture that he'd been building since he was 11 years old and had first understood what his name meant in this world. Malfoy caught his eye across the hall. The expression on Malfoy's face was complicated, not the usual contempt or competitive hostility, but something more unsettled. Harry remembered what he'd said to Ron, there's no Malfoy contract on the list. He watched Malfoy process that absence and couldn't quite tell whether it was relief or something that looked uncomfortable adjacent to it. Then Malfoy's eyes moved to Hermione beside Harry, and back, and the complicated expression resolved into something more familiar and defensive, and he looked away. Daphne Greengrass, 2 rows over at the Slytherin table, was looking at the paper in front of her with an expression of someone in the specific quiet of a decision already made. She felt Harry looking and raised her eyes. He nodded slightly. She nodded back. That was all. Neville dropped into the seat across from Harry with the expression of someone who had a great deal to say and was trying to select the right amount of it. I read it, he said. Morning, Neville. My gran sent me a letter, Neville said. He paused, she says what was done to you was a disgrace and that she always had reservations about some of those families. She also says, and I'm quoting, the Potter boy has more spine than half the Wisengamot, which is not a high bar but is notable. Harry felt something warm and genuine in his chest. Tell Augusta I said thank you. She also wants to know if you need character witnesses for any Wisengamot proceedings. Neville said this with a slight air of someone who found his grandmother occasionally alarming. She has opinions about the Knott family specifically. I'll keep that in mind. He spent the first half of breakfast answering the most essential of the morning's Owl Post, 2 letters from Charlotta about new ICW filings that required his signature, one from Sirius that was mostly exclamation points and the phrase beautifully done in letters that suggested he'd been writing in a state of considerable excitement, and one from an address he didn't recognize that Hermione intercepted, read the first line of, and set aside with a look that said not now, not today. Who's it from? Harry asked. Lord Rosier's barrister, she said. His petition for emergency proxy release was approved this morning. The warmth in his chest went somewhere cooler. When? The letter doesn't say. Just that the petition was approved and that Rosier intends to make a formal claim in person. She paused. Harry, Rosier isn't like Parks and the solicitors yesterday. He filed his contract in 1981 with a personal blood seal, which puts it in a different tier from the others. It's not just a blood lock, it's a personal oath component. The dissolution technique that's worked on the others, might not work cleanly, Harry finished. Might not work at all, she said carefully. He thought about this while eating the rest of his breakfast. A personal blood oath was different from a binding contract, it was a piece of the signatory's magic, put into the document as collateral against default. Breaking it wasn't just a matter of refusing the contract's authority. You had to contend with the piece of someone else's will that was built into it. What does Charlotta say? Ron asked. She doesn't know about the personal oath yet, Hermione said. It wasn't in the standard survey notation. I found it in a footnote on the secondary scan data that Pomfrey attached to the copy. Harry looked at her. She had the secondary scan data. How long have you had that? Since yesterday morning. I didn't want to, she paused, I was waiting to understand it properly before I brought it. How do you understand it now? Well enough. She looked at him. The personal blood oath means Rosier put a piece of his own magical will into the contract. To break it, you don't just have to reject the contract. You have to reject him. His will. Directly. She pushed her pumpkin juice aside and leaned forward slightly. The sovereign tier classification, what Apollon said about your magic affecting compact magic, that's relevant here. A sovereign tier magical signature encountering a blood oath isn't just dissolving paper. You'd be overriding someone's actual magical agency. Is that dangerous? Ron asked. For him, Hermione said. Potentially, yes. Harry sat with this for a moment. Rosier had been a Death Eater. Had filed a contract on a 1-year-old in the year he expected a Dark Lord to win a war, had sealed it with his own blood, and had spent 25 years waiting for a chance to leverage it. And now Harry's magic, if pushed against that personal oath, might hurt him. He thought about whether he cared. He decided the question was more complicated than yes or no, and filed it for the conversation with Apollon that was still waiting for him this morning. He checked his watch. 8 o'clock. He stood up. I have a meeting, he said. The address on Apollon's card was a private sitting room above the 3 broomsticks, accessed by a separate entrance on the north side of the building. The landlady, Madame Rosmerta, let him in with the expression of someone who had been paid well to be professionally incurious, and the staircase was narrow and wood-paneled and smelled of old fires and something floral that got stronger as he climbed. Apollon was already there. She was sitting by the window with a pot of tea and a copy of the Wizarding Tribune open on the table in front of her, and she was still in the clothes she'd been wearing yesterday, or clothes so similar that the distinction was academic, and her hair was not quite as precisely arranged as it had been in the Great Hall. She had the look of someone who had been up most of the night thinking. She looked at him when he came in. Then she looked at the paper. Baines, she said. He's good. He printed the document straight, Harry said, sitting down across from her. That was all I wanted. You gave him my covenant. I gave him everything equally, Harry said. Your covenant, Dumbledore's contracts, the Death Eater families. All of it. You're not singled out. She poured him tea without asking, which he took as a sign that she'd decided to behave as if this were a normal meeting. He accepted it. The response is all ready, she gestured at the window, vaguely outward, toward a world that was currently very busy having opinions. The ICW has received 14 formal complaints since 6 this morning. 7 of them are about the Death Eater families. 3 are about Dumbledore. 2 are about contract law reform. 2 are about the Conclave. She set the paper down. Specifically about whether our covenant constitutes magical coercion of a minor. Does it? Harry asked. The silver eyes held his. Under Conclave law, no. Under British law, the argument can be made. She paused. Under any law that I personally find defensible, the answer is more complicated than I would like it to be. He hadn't expected that. He let it sit rather than respond immediately, which he suspected she appreciated. I've been in this position before, she continued. Not with this specific situation. But in positions where the conclave's established practice and my own judgment were pointing in different directions. She looked out the window at Hogsmeade going about its morning. The covenant was signed by my predecessor. I was 22 when I became Queen Regent. The covenant was already 17 years old. I inherited it the way you inherit everything. The furniture and the obligations and the things that were decided before you were old enough to have opinions about them. Harry looked at her. You didn't want to come here. I wanted to come here, she said. I didn't want to come here and collect someone. She said the word with a specific distaste, as if tasting it. I came because the Conclave Council insisted, and because the Blood Sovereignty Covenant has legal implications that extend beyond my personal preferences, and because, she stopped. Because? Harry asked. Because Fleur told me something about you, she said. After the tournament. She said you ran back into a graveyard to bring a dead boy home to his parents. When you didn't have to. She was looking at him now with that quality of genuine attention, the one he'd caught briefly in McGonagall's office behind the armor. She said it like it meant something important about who you were. And I thought about that, and I thought about what the Covenant said about sovereign tier classification, and I thought, what kind of person is this? Harry said nothing. And then I sat in your great hall yesterday and you looked at me the way people look at weather and told me that I was going to need to work harder than a compulsion charm. She picked up her tea. I've met 3 previous sovereign tier assessments in my life. All 3 were large. Enormous. The kind of power that fills a room and knows it does. None of them were like you. How am I different? They were their power, she said. You carry yours. It's not the same thing. Harry turned his teacup in his hands. Outside the window a group of third years were walking up the Hogsmeade path in their Saturday morning freedom, arguing about something, their voices faint and ordinary. Hermione found something in the secondary scan data, he said. About Rosier's contract. Apollon set down her cup. He told her about the personal blood oath. Her expression shifted as he spoke, not alarmed exactly, but with the focus of someone for whom this information connected to something already known. The Conclave has encountered blood oath contracts before, she said, when he finished. In the context of sovereign tier individuals specifically. She paused. When a sovereign tier magical signature engages directly with a blood oath, it doesn't simply nullify it. The sovereign magic reads the oath, reads the intent behind it. The will of the person who signed it. She looked at him carefully. What I'm telling you is that when you engage with Rosier's oath, you will know what he was thinking when he signed it. Not just the words. The intent. Harry absorbed this. I'll know what he wanted. What he wanted, what he feared, what he hoped. She paused. A Death Eater who signed a blood oath on a 1-year-old in 1981. Yes. The fire in the grate shifted. Harry looked at it. That's why you're here, he said. Not just the legal proceedings. Apollon was quiet for a moment. I'm here because the Conclave Council told me to file the sovereignty claim, she said. I am also here because blood sovereignty covenants were created, originally, not to claim ownership of powerful individuals but to protect them. She held his gaze. The covenant my predecessor signed was not filed to own you, Mr. Potter. It was filed because someone in the Conclave assessed your magic on the night your parents died and understood what you were going to be, and was afraid for you. Harry went still. The original intent, Apollon continued, and her voice was quieter now, was protective custodianship. Not ownership. The distinction matters legally and it matters, I think, personally. She looked at the window again. My predecessor was not wrong that you needed protection. She was wrong about the method. And the Conclave Council that has been pushing me to file the sovereignty claim is operating from the contract as written, not from the intent behind it, and those have become very different things. The room was quiet enough that Harry could hear the fire and the distant sound of the village going about it Saturday. You're not going to file it, he said. I haven't decided, she said. I'm telling you what I know, which is more than I should be telling you, technically. I'm telling you because, she paused, and seemed to be choosing words with unusual care. Because I think you deserve to know the truth about why this covenant exists, even if you decide to dissolve it regardless. Harry thought about October 31st, 1981. About a 1-year-old in a house that was about to become rubble. About someone from the conclave who had been close enough to assess his magic and had understood what they were seeing and had been afraid for him. He thought about the fact that no one had come back. Not at 15 for the reaffirmation. Not at any point in 16 years. If it was protective, he said, why didn't anyone come? Apollin's jaw tightened slightly. Because my predecessor died in 1989. And the council that succeeded her was more interested in the legal implications of having a sovereign tier asset under covenant than in the protective purpose it was created for. She said it flatly, the way you say things that you have spent time being angry about and have reached a kind of exhausted honesty about. I became Queen Regent in 1993. I reviewed the covenant. I saw the date. I saw the intent. She looked at him. And I did not come to you then either, and that is something I have to account for. The honesty of it was unexpected and Harry sat with it. She'd had 3 years, since she became Queen Regent, in which she could have come to him. Could have explained. Could have asked rather than claimed. She hadn't. Why not, he asked. Not accusatory. Genuinely asking. Because the council wanted me to wait until you were of age and approach it as a legal matter, she said. And because Fleur was at Beauxbatons and I was managing a political crisis with the Norwegian conclave faction and because, she stopped. Because I told myself the timing wasn't right, which is what people tell themselves when they're afraid of a difficult conversation. Harry looked at her. A Veela queen, sitting in a rented room above a pub in Hogsmeade, being honest about being afraid of a difficult conversation. He found he respected it. All right, he said. All right, she repeated. I'm going to dissolve the covenant, he said. I was going to do it regardless. But I'm telling you first, and I'm telling you that I understand what it was originally meant to be, and that matters. He paused. It doesn't change the outcome. But it matters. She held his gaze for a long moment. And the conclave council? That's your problem, he said. I'm not the conclave's property to negotiate with. But if you want to have a different kind of conversation with me, about what sovereign tier actually means, about what my magic does and what it doesn't do, that's a conversation I'd consider having. Not as a subject. He considered, as a consultant, maybe. Something moved in her face. Not quite a smile. Something that had more history in it than a smile. The conclave has never had a consultant, she said. Then we'd both be doing something new, Harry said. He stood. Set down his teacup. She rose too, and they stood on opposite sides of the table with the Treaty of 1847 and a blood covenant and 25 years of someone else's decisions between them, and it was the most level he'd felt in any conversation since this whole thing had started. The covenant, he said. Can I do it here? Now. She looked at him. Then she reached into her robes and produced a slim case, old leather, silver clasp, and set it on the table. Inside, on a bed of dark velvet, was a folded document sealed with deep blue wax. The original. Not a copy, not a survey reproduction. The actual blood sovereignty covenant, signed on October 31st, 1981, in the hand of a woman who'd been afraid for a 1-year-old and had expressed it badly. Harry picked it up. The magic in it was unlike anything in the other 99 contracts. Those had been weight and rope and assumption. This was alive. Not malevolent. The original intent was in it, the protective instinct of the woman who'd signed it, and underneath that the conclave's accumulated legal interest, and underneath that something older, the bloodwork of the covenant itself, the ancient compact magic that Apollon had said his signature could affect. He held it and felt it reading him back. This was different from the others. The others had been external claims, things imposed on him from outside. This one had been built around something that was genuinely there, built around the specific quality of his magic, and it knew him in a way the others hadn't. He looked at it. Let it look at him. Let it register exactly what it was dealing with. Then he said, quietly, to the covenant and the intent behind it and the woman who'd signed it and the woman standing across the table watching him, "Thank you for the intention. I don't need it anymore." The covenant dissolved in his hands. Not like the others, not the rope unraveling, not the magic emptying out. It dissolved the way early morning mist dissolves when the light comes fully up. Gradually, warmly, as if it had been waiting for permission. The velvet in the case was empty. Apollon looked at it for a long moment. Her face was doing something that Harry chose not to look at too directly, because some moments deserved privacy. "That's done then," she said, and her voice was very level. "That's done," he agreed. He picked up his bag. At the door he turned back. "Rosier is coming," he said. "His petition was approved this morning. His contract has a personal blood oath on it." He paused. "When I dissolve it, Hermione says I'll read his intent." What he was thinking when he signed it. "Yes," Apollon said. "Is there anything I should know about what to do with that?" She was quiet for a moment. "Don't hold it," she said. "Whatever you find in it, read it and release it. A sovereign-tier signature that holds the intent of someone who meant you harm is," she paused, searching for the word, "corrosive." "Read and release," Harry said. "Read and release," she confirmed. He nodded and left. The staircase was narrow and the morning outside was getting bright, and somewhere in England a man named Rosier was on his way, carrying 25 years of calculated malice sealed in his own blood. Harry walked back up toward the castle and thought about what it would feel like to read it, and about Apollon's warning, and about the fact that he now had 28 contracts left in the folio and one of them was the hardest one yet. He dissolved 17 more before Rosier arrived. He did it in the library, methodically, with Hermione beside him making notes on each dissolution and Charlotta's certification charms running in the background to create legal records of each one. Ron kept watch at the library entrance, not because anyone was going to stop them, but because Ron understood instinctively that some processes deserved a sentinel, and had appointed himself to the role without being asked. The dissolutions were getting faster. His magic had learned the process, recognized binding structures now the way you recognize a knot pattern after you've untied the same type enough times. Most took under 30 seconds. 2 more had blood locks that required a few minutes each. One had a secondary bind he hadn't seen before, a sympathetic link to a family heirloom, and that one took 8 minutes and left him with a headache that Hermione pressed a potion into his hands for without commentary, which he appreciated. At 2 in the afternoon, Charlotta appeared in the library doorway. "He's here," she said. Harry set down the contract he'd been about to start. "Where?" "Hogwarts gates. He's applied for formal entry under the Magical Contracts Claimant Access provision, which gives a party with an active registered contract the right to request a supervised meeting with the subject." She paused. "His contract is still registered as active with the Ministry. We filed the dissolution certification this morning but the Ministry registry takes 48 hours to update. So he's technically within his rights," Harry said. "Technically," she confirmed, in the tone of someone who found this technically objectionable. Harry stood. "Does Dumbledore know?" "McGonagall is managing the gate situation. She's refused entry pending your decision." He looked at Hermione and Ron. "Come with me," he said, and walked out of the library. Edmund Rosier was 63 years old and had the specific look of a man who had spent 25 years in supervised ministry conditions doing nothing but waiting, and the waiting had refined him in the way prolonged cold refines stone, harder, sharper, more brittle at the edges. He was thin, elegantly dressed in robes that were trying very hard to signal that incarceration was something that happened to other people, and he had a ministry handler standing 2 feet to his left who looked professionally miserable about being here. He was smiling when Harry reached the gate. It was a specific kind of smile, the kind that was built to communicate possession of information. The kind that assumed it was holding the better hand. "Mr. Potter," he said. He had a precise, studied voice, the kind developed over decades of saying things designed to land a particular way. "I've read the morning papers." "Good," Harry said. "Then you know your contract is in the dissolution process." "I know your solicitor filed a dissolution certification this morning," Rosier said. "I also know the registry hasn't processed it. Until it does, my contract retains active status." The smile was doing the same thing it had been doing since Harry arrived, not warming, not shifting, just sitting there as a vehicle for confidence. "Which means I have a legal right to make my claim in person, in front of witnesses, for the record." "Your contract," Harry said, "has a personal blood oath on it." The smile shifted fractionally. "Impressive research." "My friend is impressive," Harry said, without looking away from Rosier. "The blood oath means when I dissolve it, I'll read your intent at signing. What you were hoping for when you put your blood in that document in 1980. Something moved behind Rosier's eyes. "That doesn't concern me," he said. But the smile had become something that required more maintenance. "It should," Harry said. "Because the thing about sovereign tier magic isn't just that it dissolves binding contracts. It's that it reads the intent in them. Completely. And whatever you were thinking when you signed that oath," he paused, "I'm going to know it. And whatever I know, my solicitor can subpoena as evidence, because intent at signing is legally relevant to the validity of a contract." The handler to Rosier's left made a small movement. Not alarmed, more the movement of someone recalibrating their professional assessment of the situation they'd walked into. Rosier looked at Harry for a long moment. The manufactured confidence was still there, but it had developed a structural crack, the kind that doesn't show until the light hits it directly. "You can't read magical intent through dissolution," he said. "That's not how it works." "You don't actually know how it works," Harry said. "Because you've never met a sovereign tier magical signature before." He held Rosier's gaze with the flat, clean certainty that had nothing performed about it. "You want to make your claim on record? Make it. I'll dissolve the contract right here, in front of your handler and my solicitor and my friends, and we'll see what 25 years of waiting looks like from the inside." Rosier was very still. The handler cleared his throat quietly and said, in the tone of professional advice being offered to someone who might not be listening, "Mr. Rosier, perhaps a review of the circumstances. The contract is void," Charlotta said from Harry's right, producing documents from her briefcase with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd had them ready since this morning. "Not pending, void. The magical dissolution took place at 9:47 this morning and I have the certification. The ministry registry's 48-hour processing time is administrative, not legal. The contract has no enforceability." She looked at Rosier over the documents with the expression she'd probably worn when she read Note 17 to Undersecretary Fortescue. "You've come a long way for nothing." Rosier looked from Charlotta to Harry. The smile was gone. What remained was the face underneath it, not what Harry had expected. Not rage. Something older. Something that had curdled in on itself over a long time. "The contract was insurance," Rosier said, and his voice had dropped the studied precision and was just his actual voice now, flatter and tireder. "In 1980 we were certain. You thought you were going to win," Harry said. "And you wanted something to show for it, whatever happened." "Something to show for it," Rosier repeated. The phrase seemed to reach him differently than he'd meant it to leave himself. He stood with it for a moment. The handler touched his arm lightly. "Sir." Rosier looked at Harry for one more beat. The calculation was still in his eyes, Harry could see it, the machine of it still running, looking for an angle. But the angles were closed. "You're going to dissolve it anyway," Rosier said. "I already did," Harry said. "This morning. The certification is in my solicitor's hand." Rosier looked at Charlotta's document. Then he turned without another word and walked back toward the ministry transport, his handler falling into step beside him, the two of them diminishing down the lane toward Hogsmeade with the specific quality of an exit that had not gone the way it was intended to. The gate area was quiet. "You didn't read his intent," Hermione said. "Carefully. Not critically." "I didn't need to," Harry said. "I just needed him to think I would." Ron exhaled. "Bloody language," McGonagall said, from behind them all. "Brilliant," Ron finished. "I was going to say brilliant." McGonagall made the sound that meant she was choosing not to respond to that. Harry turned back toward the castle and checked the folio in his mind. 11 contracts remaining. None of them had personal blood oaths. None of them were from families with the specific combination of malice and patience that Rosier had been carrying. He thought about Apollin's warning, read and release. Don't hold it. He thought about Rosier's face when the angles closed. He thought about the covenant dissolving in his hands like morning mist, and the velvet in the case going empty, and Apollin's voice when she said that's done then with the particular quality of something long carried being set down. 11 left. He went back to the library and dissolved 3 more before dinner. That evening, in the Ollery, alone with the sounds of birds and the smell of old stone and clean air, he wrote to Sirius. Everything moving fast. Charlotta is extraordinary. Rosier came and went. The conclave covenant is dissolved. I met with Apollin this morning. She's more complicated than I expected. 11 contracts left. We're in a good position legally. Dumbledore has cooperated so far, I think he means it, mostly. The press is doing what press does. I'm not telling you not to come. I said sit tight, but I know you, and I know you're already packing. Just, when you come ready. Some of the families whose contracts I've dissolved are angry. Quiet angry, which is the kind that plots. And there's a meeting coming at the Wisengamot about the contract law reform angle, and I'd like to have the Black family's legal weight in the room when that happens. Also, for what it's worth, I think I'm all right. Not performing all right. Actually. The ground feels like mine for the first time in a while. Harry. He sent it with Hedwig, who left in a clean arc into the darkening sky. He stood in the Ollery for a while after, listening to the birds settle for the night, the last of the September light going purple over the mountains. 8 contracts remaining. He was going to dissolve 3 more tonight. In the morning, he had a meeting with Charlotta about the Wisengamot reform submission, and a conversation with Fleur that he suspected was waiting for him, and somewhere out there the families who'd been quiet about being stripped of their contracts were starting to have meetings of their own. He climbed back toward the castle with the folio lighter under his arm than it had been yesterday, and felt the ground beneath his feet being exactly what he'd told Sirius, his. Chapter 5, The Tribunal. The Wisengamot session was called for the following Thursday. Not a full session, an emergency convening of the Committee on Magical Contracts and Heritage Provisions, which had 23 members and met in a lower chamber of the Ministry building that smelled of old wood and older decisions. Charlotta had filed the reform submission Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon the committee had scheduled the hearing, which told Harry 2 things: first, that the article had created the kind of pressure that turned bureaucratic wheels fast, and second, that someone on the committee wanted to control the narrative before it controlled them. He found out who on Wednesday, when a second letter arrived from the committee chair, Senior Undersecretary Hargrove, who was either completely independent or completely owned by the families whose contracts Harry had dissolved, and whose letter read with the specific clipped neutrality of someone trying to give no information while appearing to give all of it. "It's a tribunal," Hermione said, reading over his shoulder in the common room. It said committee hearing. It said committee hearing and then used the word respondent to describe your role, which is tribunal language. She took the letter from him and read it again. "They're not hearing your reform submission. They're hearing a complaint." "From who?" She found the relevant line. "A coalition of families filing a joint grievance under the Heritage Provisions Act, claiming that the magical dissolution of registered contracts constitutes an unauthorized use of classified magic." She looked up. They're not arguing the contracts were valid. They're arguing that the way you broke them was illegal. Harry sat with this for a moment. Outside the common room window the Scottish mountains were doing their Wednesday morning thing, grey and enormous and indifferent to Wisengamot procedure. Who's in the coalition? He asked. Hermione read the names. 7 families. 5 from the Death Eater adjacent list, 1 minor noble house that had been quiet until now, and, at the bottom of the list, a name that made Harry go still. Avery, he said. Avery, she confirmed. He's the coalition's primary filer. He can't use his own name, ministry conditions, so he's filed through his family trust, but the barrister is his. Harry looked at the letter. The same lawyer who'd gotten Rosier's petition approved had apparently found a new angle. Not the contracts themselves, those were gone, legally and magically, and attacking them directly was a losing argument. Instead they'd pivoted to the method. The dissolution itself. Framing his use of sovereign tier magic as an unauthorized magical act performed on registered Wisengamot documents. That's actually clever, he said. Hermione made a noise that suggested she found it objectionable but was unable to disagree with the assessment. It's the footnote play, she said. In reverse. They're not fighting the documents you wanted to fight. They're making you fight a document they chose. Charlotta will love it, Harry said. He sent an owl to Charlotta that morning. She wrote back in 40 minutes, a single sheet of tight, organized text that covered the legal counterposition, the specific statutes that protected autonomous magical acts by the subject of a contract, and, at the bottom, 2 words underlined twice, come Thursday. Sirius arrived Tuesday evening. He came through the flue in McGonagall's office. She'd authorized the connection because, as she told Harry with the controlled expression of someone making a decision they felt good about, your godfather has been internationally pardoned and his presence here is entirely appropriate given the circumstances. Sirius came through in a burst of green flame and immediately had Harry in the kind of hug that communicated several months of accumulated worry and a profound relief at finding something intact. He pulled back and looked at Harry with the assessing expression that Harry had come to understand was the parent-substitute version of checking for damage. You look fine, Harry said. I was going to say different, Sirius said. You look like someone who's been running their own show for a week and has discovered they're good at it. Harry smiled at that. Charlotta is good at it. I'm just not getting in her way. Getting out of the way of talented people and letting them work is also a skill, Sirius said. He looked around McGonagall's office with the expression of someone doing a quick territorial assessment. Minerva. You look as terrifying as ever. Sirius, McGonagall said, with the tone of someone who had known this man since he was 11 and had maintained a specific category for him ever since. Do try not to set anything on fire. That was one time and James started it. James is not here to argue the point. The moment shifted, briefly, with the weight of James Potter's absence. Sirius let it settle and pass, the practiced movement of someone who'd learned to carry that weight without stopping under it. Then he looked at Harry again and said, walk me through Thursday. They sat in McGonagall's office until 11, Sirius and Harry and Charlotta who'd been in Hogsmeade and arrived 20 minutes after Sirius, and they built the Thursday strategy with the systematic rigor of people who understood they were walking into something that had been designed to humiliate and were going to make it function differently. Charlotta laid out the legal framework. Sirius provided the political layer. He'd been doing his own research, and the ancient and noble House of Black carried weight in the Wisengamot that was different from legal argument, more social, the weight of old name and old money and the specific authority that came from centuries of being the kind of family that other families paid attention to. The committee chair, Sirius said. Hargrove. He's not independent, Charlotta said. No. But he's not owned outright either. He's the kind of man who follows consensus. If the room is against him he'll recalibrate. Sirius looked at Harry. The other committee members, 3 of them are from old families who don't have contracts on the survey. They've been quiet but they're watching. They're embarrassed, Harry said. The article put everyone who had a contract on record. The families without contracts are sitting in a very public position of having not done that particular thing, and right now that looks good, and they want to keep it looking good. Sirius smiled. It was the smile he had when Harry surprised him, which he tried to hide and wasn't quite successful at. Exactly. Those three will follow whoever's winning the room, and I intend to make sure we're winning the room. He paused. I'm going to address the committee as head of the ancient and noble House of Black, in support of the reform submission and in support of my godson's legal position. The Black family weight won't decide the committee, but it'll anchor the respectable side of the argument. Dumbledore? Harry asked. Charlotta and Sirius exchanged a look. He's offered to provide a statement, Charlotta said. I've accepted. He's not attending in person, his presence tends to become the event. What's his statement say? That the contracts he authorized were made with good intentions and without adequate legal scrutiny, and that he supports the reform of the Heritage Provisions Act to close the provisions under which they were filed. She paused. It's an admission. Not full accountability, but genuine. She looked at Harry. He also says, in writing, on record, that your magical autonomy in the dissolution of the contracts was legally and ethically correct. Harry nodded slowly. It wasn't everything. But it was something Dumbledore hadn't had to do, and had done. What about me? Harry asked. In the room. What do I do? Charlotta looked at him with the expression of someone who'd been waiting for this question. You sit beside me and you let me work, she said. Until I tell you not to. And then? She smiled, small and precise. And then you do what you've been doing all week. The ministry atrium on Thursday morning had the quality of a building that knew something significant was happening in one of its chambers and was adjusting its ambient energy accordingly. The fireplaces were busy, flu arrivals coming in every few minutes, faces Harry recognized from the paper and faces he didn't. The press was there, naturally, not just Baines from the Tribune but 4 other outlets, a photographer, and Rita Skeeter in a set of robes so violently green they constituted their own argument for something. Harry walked through the atrium with Charlotta on his left, Sirius on his right, and Hermione and Ron a half-step behind, and he looked straight ahead and let the room have its moment of recognition and didn't stop for it. Skeeter materialized beside him with the particular talent she had for appearing in spaces that hadn't offered her an invitation. Harry, just a few words about, Ms. Skeeter, Charlotta said, without breaking stride, Mr. Potter has no comment for your publication. Philip Baines at the Tribune has been authorized as press liaison. Direct your questions there. Skeeter opened her mouth. Charlotta had already moved past her, and Harry with her, and the momentum of their group carried them through the atrium and to the lift without further incident. In the lift, descending, Ron said, "She's already writing something." I could see her hand moving. "She's always writing something," Hermione said. "As long as she's writing about what happened in the room rather than what she's imagined about what might happen in the room," Charlotta said, "I can work with it." The lower chamber was smaller than Harry had expected for something called a Wisengamot committee, rows of wooden seats arranged in a horseshoe around a central floor, 23 committee members on the elevated bench at the front, and a gallery above for observers that was already 3/4 full. The room had the smell of old authority and the kind of deliberate solemnity that institutions use to remind you of their weight. The families of the coalition were already seated on one side of the central floor, 7 groups of people in various configurations of expensive robes and carefully neutral expressions, with barristers between them. Parks was there, from the gate confrontation earlier in the week. 3 faces Harry didn't know. And at the end of the row, separated slightly from the others, Avery's barrister, a compact, sharp-featured woman named Leclaire who had the look of someone who'd been briefed extensively and had found the brief interesting. Charlotta took her seat at the table on the opposite side of the floor. Harry sat beside her. Sirius took a seat in the observers' gallery, directly visible from Harry's position, with 2 black family solicitors on either side of him and the particular straight-backed posture of a man who was deploying his presence deliberately. Hermione and Ron were in the gallery too, one row behind Sirius. Harry caught Ron's eye. Ron gave him the small nod that meant we're here, we've got you, which was one of the more useful things Ron communicated non-verbally. Hargrove, the committee chair, was a tall man in his 60s with the carefully assembled dignity of someone who wore authority as a professional costume. He called the session to order with a tap of his wand on the bench, the sound ringing out cleanly in the old stone room. This committee has been convened, he said, to consider a complaint filed under the Heritage Provisions Act by a coalition of 7 families, regarding the unauthorized use of classified magical techniques on registered Wisengamot documents. He looked at the papers in front of him. The committee has also received a reform submission from Charlotta Vance, acting for Harry James Potter, proposing amendments to the Heritage Provisions Act regarding pre-birth betrothal contracts. Both matters will be heard today. He paused. Ms. Leclerc, you may proceed. Leclerc stood. She had a good voice for a room like this, the kind that carried without effort, that landed with clean precision. The coalition's position is straightforward, she said. 7 families held contracts registered with the Wisengamot. Those contracts were dissolved through a process that has not been classified, certified, or authorized under any existing provision of magical contract law. She looked at the bench. Mr. Potter's solicitor has filed dissolution certifications with this committee. Those certifications describe the process as magical dissolution by the contract subject under autonomous magical rights provision. What they do not describe, what they cannot describe, because no such provision exists, is the specific magical technique used. She paused. The coalition submits that the use of an unclassified and uncertified magical technique on registered legal documents is itself an illegal act, regardless of the validity of the underlying documents. She sat down. Hargrove looked at Charlotta. Ms. Vance. Charlotta stood. She had a file open in front of her but she didn't look at it, which Harry had noticed was a habit of hers in formal proceedings. She'd read everything already, she just had the file there as a signal to the room that the reading had happened. The coalition's argument, she said, has 2 components. First, that a specific legal provision must exist before a magical action is legitimate. Second, that the absence of such a provision in this case renders Mr. Potter's actions illegal. She paused. Both components are incorrect, and I'll address them in order. She reached into the file and produced a document. The Magical Autonomy Act of 1923 establishes that any magical action taken by a witch or wizard upon their own magical signature, bindings, or legal person requires no external authorization. No provision, no certification, no committee approval. The Act is explicit and has been upheld in 12 separate Wisengamot rulings. She named them, dates and case numbers, from memory, without hurrying. The contracts that Mr. Potter dissolved were bound to his magical signature. His magical signature is his. The dissolution was a magical act performed on his own person. It requires no certification beyond the record of its occurrence. She set down the document. As to the specific technique used, she paused, and something in her voice shifted slightly, not louder but with more edge. The coalition is asking this committee to rule that Mr. Potter's natural magical capacity is an unauthorized technique. That the magic he was born with, which has been assessed and documented since childhood, constitutes an illegal instrument when used in his own defense. She looked at the committee bench. I would ask the committee to consider what it would mean to declare a person's inherent magic illegal. And I would ask them to consider whose interests that declaration would serve. The gallery was very quiet. Hargrove looked at the papers in front of him. Ms. Leclerc, do you wish to respond to the Autonomy Act citation? Leclerc stood. Her expression suggested she'd been prepared for this but had hoped the argument would play differently. The 1923 Act covers actions on one's own magical signature in the context of personal protective magic, she said. The coalition submits that registered Wisengamot documents constitute public legal instruments, not personal magical property, and that the 1923 Act does not extend to, were the contracts bound to Mr. Potter's magical signature. Hargrove asked. Leclerc paused. They were. Then they were, by definition, personal magical property. The pause that followed had a specific quality, the quality of an argument that has hit a structural problem and is trying to decide whether to rebuild around it or pretend the problem isn't there. The coalition also submits, Leclerc said, pivoting, that the classification of Mr. Potter's magical capacity as sovereignteer by a foreign organization, specifically the Veela conclave, has not been verified by British magical authorities, and that the use of unverified foreign assessments in legal proceedings, I'd like to address that, Harry said. Charlotta put her hand on his arm, not stopping him, just a half-second check. Then she removed it and gave him the smallest nod. He stood. The room adjusted to him the way rooms adjusted when something happened that hadn't been on the schedule. Hargrove looked at him with the expression of a man recalibrating. Mr. Potter, Hargrove said. The sovereignteer classification, Harry said, doesn't need to be verified by a British authority because it's not a legal category in British magical law. It's a descriptive term. What it describes is that my magic interacts with compact magic differently than standard magical signatures do. He looked at Leclerc. The coalition's argument rests on that classification being foreign and therefore suspect. But the classification doesn't create the ability. The ability exists regardless of what anyone calls it. The conclave gave it a name. I've had it since I was born. He paused. If the committee would like a demonstration rather than a description, I have 8 remaining contracts from the survey in my solicitor's briefcase. All 8 are from families in this coalition. I can dissolve them here. You can observe the technique and determine whether it constitutes an illegal magical act. The gallery above made a sound. Not loud, more the sound of 36 people simultaneously adjusting their expectations of what this hearing was going to be. That would be, Leclerc started. Informative, Harry said. I believe the word you want is informative. Hargrove looked at the committee bench. A rapid silent exchange happened there, the kind of institutional conversation that lives entirely in expression and minute head movements. Then he looked at Harry. The committee would find a demonstration relevant to its determination, he said. Charlotta produced the remaining contracts from her briefcase. 8 of them, arranged in order. She handed Harry the first. He held it. Felt its structure, a 1980 filing, blood lock, the same old Ropan assumption that most of the Death Eater contracts had. He looked at it with the flat, clean refusal that had become second nature over the past week, the refusal that wasn't rage or even particular effort but simply the absolute absence of permission. It dissolved in 7 seconds. He held the dissolution in the air for a moment, the moment when the magic came apart, and it was visible because sovereignteer dissolution had a quality to it, a brief amber glow at the edges where the binding released. Not theatrical. Just what it looked like. He set the empty parchment on the table. The committee bench was very quiet. He dissolved the second. The third. One had a sympathetic link that took 20 seconds and produced a slightly brighter release. The fourth and fifth were straightforward. The sixth resisted slightly, more invested binding magic, more structural complexity, and he held it for 45 seconds while the resistance pushed back, and he pushed back harder without heat or urgency, the way a door pushes back against a hand and the hand simply doesn't move, and the contract released. The seventh dissolved cleanly. The eighth, Avery's filing, was last. He'd saved it deliberately. He held it and felt the difference immediately, a more recent blood lock, 1981, the personal oath element Hermione had found in the secondary scan. This one had malice in it, deliberate and calculated, the kind of magic that knew exactly what it was doing when it was done and had been proud of it. He read it the way Apollon had told him, let it open, let the intent surface, let himself know it. Avery in 1981, 23 years old, sitting in a room somewhere writing his name in his own blood onto a document about a 1-year-old child who he viewed as a political asset, a chit to be cashed in regardless of which side of the war ended up winning. Not ideology. Not even conviction. Pure, cold calculation, the act of a man who had no loyalty except to his own survival and had spent his entire life dressing that up in the language of blood purity and noble tradition. Harry read it and released it, the way you release smoke from an open palm, not taking any of it, not holding any of it. Then he dissolved the contract. The amber release was brighter on this one, briefly, before it went quiet. He set down the empty parchment. The room was completely still. 8 contracts, he said to the committee bench. All dissolved. All belonging to families in this coalition. All of them filed on a minor child who had no legal representation and no knowledge of their existence. He looked at Hargrove directly. The coalition submitted that the technique I used is illegal. I've just used it 8 times in front of 23 Wisengamot committee members, a full observers gallery, and 4 press outlets. If it's illegal, the committee now has ample opportunity to say so on record. Hargrove held his gaze. He was a man who followed consensus, Sirius had said. Harry looked at the committee bench and watched the consensus forming in real time, the 3 old family members who'd had no contracts and wanted to keep looking good, leaning forward now, the 2 who'd been neutral shifting their posture, Hargrove himself reading the room the way he always read rooms and finding it clearly pointed in one direction. Leclaire was on her feet. The coalition requests a recess to, the committee, Hargrove said, will not be recessing. He looked at the papers in front of him. The coalition's complaint is dismissed. The magical dissolution technique demonstrated by Mr. Potter falls clearly within the provisions of the 1923 Magical Autonomy Act. He moved to the next papers. Ms. Vance. Your reform submission. Charlotta was already standing. The reform submission took 40 minutes and Charlotta argued it with the systematic precision of someone who had been building toward this specific moment for 20 years of contract law work. The Heritage Provisions Act, she submitted, had been used to file binding contracts on minors who had no representation, no knowledge, and no recourse. The specific provisions that allowed it were archaic, poorly worded, and had been exploited by both well-intentioned and malicious parties. She proposed 3 amendments: clear age of consent requirements, mandatory notification of subjects at majority, and a right of dissolution by the subject upon reaching magical majority regardless of contractual terms. The committee voted 12 for, 3 against, 8 abstentions, which in Wisengamot terms was as close to enthusiastic support as abstention got. The amendments would go to full Wisengamot session within the month. Charlotta sat down and allowed herself a single small exhale, which was the equivalent of anyone else turning cartwheels. Harry looked up at the gallery. Sirius was grinning, the full, unguarded grin that made him look younger, that cleared 25 years of Azkaban off his face for a moment. Hermione had both hands pressed over her mouth and her eyes were very bright. Ron was clapping, practically alone in the gallery, until Sirius joined him and 2 of the black solicitors followed because they appeared to feel it was professionally appropriate. In the aisle beside the coalition's table, Leclaire was packing her briefcase with the movements of someone filing today's outcome into the professional experience column rather than the victory column. She caught Harry's eye as she straightened up and gave him a brief, clean nod, not gracious exactly, but honest. Acknowledgement from someone who'd lost to better preparation, which Harry respected more than sore defeat. He nodded back. The corridor outside the chamber was full of the specific social energy of a significant event in a small world, people talking fast, press moving between clusters, the ambient noise of dozens of concurrent conversations about what had just happened and what it meant. Fleur was there. She was standing slightly apart from the main movement, near a window that looked out on the grey November streets, in the grey work robes she wore at Gringotts. She wasn't supposed to be at this hearing, she wasn't a party to it, hadn't been notified. She caught Harry's eye and the expression on her face was one he'd been noticing all week, each time with more definition, the thing that wasn't quite the quality she'd had in the library when she'd sat across from him and told him he wasn't what she'd expected. He walked over. I read about it in the papers this morning, she said. I asked for the morning off. I thought, she paused, I thought I wanted to see it. The hearing? You. She said it without any particular inflection, which gave it more weight than if she tried to make it mean something. I wanted to see what you'd do with the room. And? She looked at him with those gray eyes, a Pauline certainty in them but something warmer in the surround of it. I've been trying to think, she said, about when I first noticed that you were, she searched for the word, worth noticing. And I think it was the second task. When you came up last and you, add Ron and my sister. You were furious, Harry said. I was grateful, she said. I was furious because it was easier. She looked out the window briefly. My mother is going to do something unexpected. What? She told the Conclave Council this morning that she is withdrawing the sovereignty claim. Fleur looked back at him. Not tabling it. Not deferring it. Withdrawing it. Permanently. She told them that the covenant lapsed, that the reaffirmation wasn't sought, and that the original protective intent has been superseded. She paused. 3 council members resigned in protest. Harry was quiet for a moment. How is she? Fleur smiled slightly, the real one rather than the public one. She is furious, she said, and she respects you enormously, and those 2 things are the same thing with her. She told me something, Harry said. About why the covenant was originally created. The protective intent. He paused, finding the right words, I told her it mattered, knowing that. Even though it didn't change the outcome. She told me that. Fleur was quiet for a moment. It is not often that someone tells my mother that what she did matters even though she still disagrees with how she did it. It was true. Yes, Fleur said. That is what made it effective. She looked at him with the expression that had been building all week, the one that was past assessment and past curiosity and into something more personal and therefore more carefully considered. What do you do now? After today. 5 contracts left in the folio, Harry said. I go back to Hogwarts and dissolve them. And then, he thought about it, then I go to class, because I've missed 3 days this week and McGonagall is definitely keeping count. She laughed, briefly, genuinely, without the managed quality her public laugh had. And after that? After that, someone's going to have to deal with the political fallout from the reform submission going to full Wisengamot session, because there are families who voted against it today who are going to try to kill it before it gets there. He paused. And Dumbledore and I have a conversation coming that isn't about contracts. The other things. The things he's kept back. He looked at her. And whatever comes after that. That is a great deal of after that, she said. It tends to be, Harry said. She looked at him for one more moment, the gray eyes reading his face with the same quality her mother had, that specific Veela attentiveness that wasn't supernatural compulsion but was something more basic, the ability of someone who paid close attention to feel what was actually there. I should go, she said. Gringotts. Of course. She didn't move immediately. When the remaining contracts are dissolved, she said, carefully, and the reform goes to session, and the Dumbledore conversation happens, if there is something after all of that. She paused. I would not be opposed to it. Harry looked at her. She met his gaze without looking away, which was its own kind of answer to any question about where she stood. I'll keep that in mind, he said. She nodded once, economical, like her sister, like her mother, the family trait of saying things in a single precise gesture, and walked away through the corridor crowd, her silver-gray robes going smooth and purposeful through the noise, and Harry watched her go and thought about after that and found it, for the first time in a long time, something that felt like a direction rather than a gap. Ron appeared at his elbow. Was that, yes? Did she just, sort of, yes? Mate. Ron sounded like he had opinions. Her mother just spent the week trying to claim you were her property. I know. And her sister is the one who, I know. I'm just establishing the situation, Ron said. For context. Context established, Harry said. Thank you. Ron was quiet for a half second. She's brilliant and terrifying and out of your league. Also established, Harry said. I support it, Ron said firmly. Unconditionally. I'm just noting the biographical complications. Harry smiled, looking out at the corridor, Charlotta moving through a cluster of committee members with documents, Sirius talking with his solicitors, the press moving in its usual organized chaos, the whole living machinery of a world that had spent a week reacting to his name on paper and was now having to readjust to the fact that the person attached to that name had opinions. 5 contracts left, Harry said. Let's go dissolve them, Ron said. They found Hermione and Charlotta and Sirius and walked back through the ministry atrium in the same formation they'd come in, Charlotta on his left, Sirius on his right, Hermione and Ron behind, and the room had the same recognition energy as before, but it had a different texture now, less the shocked attention of people watching something unexpected and more the particular attention of people recalibrating what they thought they knew. Harry walked through it without performing anything, without adjusting his pace, without looking for approval in any of the faces that turned toward him. 5 contracts left. The ground was his. He walked through the atrium and out into the cold gray November day and toward what came next, and it felt, finally, entirely like a direction he'd chosen himself. Chapter 6, No One's Property. The last 5 contracts went on Friday morning. Harry dissolved them in the library before breakfast, alone, without ceremony. The first 4 went quickly, straightforward bindings, minor families who'd filed through obscure provisions that Charlotta's reform submission would close. Each one released with the small amber pulse and was done, the parchment becoming ordinary paper, the magic returning to wherever magic went when you stopped insisting it meant something. The 5th was the Molly Weasley contract. He'd kept it. Not as leverage, not for any strategic reason, just because he'd wanted to be certain before he dissolved it that he was doing it cleanly, without residual anger at someone he loved, because he suspected that the intention behind a dissolution mattered as much as the act of it. He held it now. Felt the binding, simple, warm in texture even after 3 years, the specific quality of someone who had put genuine love into an act of misguided certainty. Not blood work, not professional legal language. Just a mother's handwriting on ministry issue parchment, filed in 1993 because she was afraid for someone and didn't know another way to show it. He thought about every Christmas jumper. About the way she'd pressed food into his hands at King's Cross in 4th year when the Dursleys hadn't come, and then gone quiet and pretended not to notice she'd done it. About the burrow, which smelled like warmth and old wood and something permanently baking, and which had been the closest thing to home he'd had before he'd started building his own sense of what home meant. He released the contract with something closer to gratitude than anything else, and it dissolved warmly, as if it had always known it was going to. He sat in the quiet library for a moment after, with the folio empty in his hands. 101 contracts. Every one of them gone. He folded the folio and put it in his bag and went to breakfast. The full Wisengamot session was 3 weeks away, which gave the reform opposition time to organize and gave Charlotta time to build the supporting coalition, and both sides used their time with equal focus. Harry was aware of it happening, the letters, the lobbying, the editorial arguments in the magical press, the way you're aware of weather building. He watched it from Hogwarts and trusted Charlotta to manage the ground game and focused, with genuine relief, on the things that had been waiting for him to have the attention to spare. Classes, primarily. He'd missed 4 days in the first 2 weeks of term, which McGonagall had recorded with the precise disapproval of someone who understood the reason and still refused to endorse the precedent. He caught up in 10 days through the combination of Hermione's notes, which were architectural in their completeness, and his own accumulated competence in subjects he'd been practicing seriously since 5th year. Snape was professionally unmoved by the entire situation, which Harry found oddly restful. Potions was the one class where nothing had changed, where the expectations were identical to what they'd always been and the grading was as punishing as ever, and there was something grounding about that. Quidditch resumed. He captained his first practice on the second Saturday after the hearing, and the team had clearly decided the entire situation had made him more interesting, which he redirected into productive energy by running them through the most demanding drills he'd ever put together and letting the physical work clear the residue of 2 weeks of legal and political adrenaline from his system. He flew afterward, alone, after the team had gone in. Just flew, high over the pitch where the castle was small below him and the lake was a grey mirror and the mountains went on forever in every direction, and the cold air was clean and indifferent and demanded nothing from him. He was ready for the Dumbledore conversation. He requested it rather than waiting to be called. That felt important, choosing the timing, choosing the ground, coming to it as himself rather than as a student summoned to the headmaster's office. He sent a note on a Monday. Dumbledore replied within an hour, whenever you're ready. He went Tuesday evening after dinner, when the castle was settling into its nighttime rhythms and the corridors had the soft, occupied quiet of a building full of people doing their own things. Dumbledore's office was warm, the instruments doing their usual ambient work, Fawkes on his perch watching Harry arrive with the specific phoenix attention that had always felt like being seen past the surface of things. Dumbledore stood when Harry came in. Not in a formal way, just standing, away from the desk, in the middle of the room, as if he'd decided that for this conversation the desk wasn't the right geography between them. Harry sat in the chair by the fire. Dumbledore sat in the one across from it. The fire between them was low and steady. The other things, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. The prophecy, Harry said. What it actually says. All of it. Not the excerpt, not the version you gave me at the end of 5th year with the parts you thought I needed. The whole thing, with your full interpretation of it. Dumbledore held his gaze. You've worked out that there's more. I worked it out in 4th year, Harry said. I just didn't push. I was still trusting that you'd give me things when you decided I needed them, and I've spent the last 2 weeks discovering what that trust costs. He paused. I'm not angry at you right now. I'm past that for this specific thing. I just need to know. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. He said the whole thing, the full prophecy, the full interpretation, the Horcrux theory that Harry had suspected existed from a half-dozen things left unsaid over 2 years. He said it with the specific quality of a man making a genuine choice to stop arranging the truth and simply tell it, and it wasn't easy to watch, and Harry let it take as long as it needed. When Dumbledore finished, the fire had burned lower. Harry sat with everything. The scale of it. The specific nature of what was coming, what he would eventually have to do, the shape of the task ahead. He sat with it the way he'd been sitting with difficult things all his life, not trying to make it smaller, not needing it to be smaller, just acknowledging the full weight and deciding to carry it. You thought I'd break, Harry said. I thought, Dumbledore said carefully, that the weight of full knowledge, given too early, would change you in ways that, you thought I'd become defined by it, Harry said. The way you were afraid I'd become defined by the scar and the contracts and everything else people stuck to my name. He looked at the fire. You were protecting me from the same thing in a different form. Yes, Dumbledore said. And you were wrong about the method, even if the instinct was right. Yes, Dumbledore said again. Harry looked at him. The old man in the chair across the fire, brilliant, fallible, genuinely loving in the way of people who love at scale and sometimes lose the individual in the institution of their care. Not a villain. Something more complicated and therefore more difficult to navigate. I need something from you going forward, Harry said. Not an apology. We've done apologies. I need an actual change, which means when you have information relevant to my situation, you give it to me directly rather than deciding when I'm ready for it. I'm always ready for what's true. He paused. Can you do that? Dumbledore held his gaze for a long moment. I can try, he said. I will not claim certainty about my own habits. But I can try. That's honest, Harry said. I'll take honest over certain. He stood to go. Fawkes made a sound, low, brief, the kind of phoenix note that wasn't quite music but wasn't quite not, and Harry looked at the bird, and Fawkes looked back with that seeing quality, and Harry felt something settle. Harry, Dumbledore said. He stopped. The reform submission. The contracts. The way you handled all of it. Dumbledore paused. Your parents would have been, he stopped himself, started again. You were magnificent. I thought you should know that I think so, regardless of what else is true between us. Harry stood at the door for a moment. I know, he said. Not with vanity. Just as a fact he'd decided to accept. Good night, Professor. He went back down the stairs and into the castle's nighttime quiet and thought, as he walked, about the road ahead, Horcruxes and a war that was coming back in the shape of a task that was enormous and his and nobody else's, and found, underneath all of it, that he was not afraid. Not performing, not afraid. Genuinely, simply, settled in himself in a way that had been building all week and was now, finally, complete. The Wisengamot session happened on a Thursday in October. The chamber was full, all 230 members present, which hadn't happened for a reform vote since 1971. The gallery was standing room. The press section was overflowing into a secondary box that the ministry had opened for the occasion. Harry sat in the public gallery with Sirius and Hermione and Ron and watched Charlotta Vance argue for 40 minutes in front of the full Wisengamot with the absolute precision of someone who had spent 30 years learning to do exactly this. She used documents, statutes, case law, and 3 specific footnotes that she read into the record at carefully chosen moments. The 3rd footnote made a senior Wisengamot member go a distinct shade of puce and ask for water. The opposition argued for 20 minutes. Their position had weakened considerably since the committee hearing. 3 of the 7 coalition families had withdrawn from the public fight, apparently deciding that continued association with the matter cost more than it gained. The remaining 4 made their arguments, which were legally competent and politically insufficient, and sat down. The vote was called. 162 for. 43 against. 25 abstentions. The Heritage Provisions Act amendments passed. The gallery made a sound like a building releasing a held breath. Hermione made a sound that was comprehensively unlike her normal composure, and Sirius grabbed Harry's shoulder and squeezed once, hard, and Ron said something short and emphatic that got lost in the noise. Harry sat in the middle of all of it and let it be what it was, not performed modesty, not the discomfort with a tension he'd spent years developing, but genuine presence in a good moment. It had happened. It was real. The provisions under which 101 contracts had been filed on a child were gone from the law. He thought about every name on that survey. Every family that had written his name onto parchment without asking him. He thought about Molly Weasley's warm handwriting and Dumbledore's precise signature and Apollin's inherited covenant and Rosier's cold calculation. He thought about the knot contract, the first one, dissolving in his hands in the dormitory while Ron played chess across the room. He thought about his father's name on the Veela covenant, signed on the worst night of everything, by a man trying to protect his son the only way available to him in the last hours of his life. He thought about Apollon saying the original intent was protective. He thought about releasing the Avery Oath, reading it and releasing it, not holding it. He let the moment be good without taking anything from it that didn't belong to him. Apollon came to find him after. Not in the chamber, outside, in the ministry atrium, while the post-vote crowd was still doing its social processing. She came with 2 of her conclave guard, but they stayed at a distance that was clearly her instruction, and she walked to where Harry was standing with his group and stopped. She looked at the chamber door, then at Harry. My council, she said, has been formally notified of the vote. How do they feel about it? The 3 who resigned are still resigned, she said. The remaining members are, she considered, recalibrating. She paused. A blood sovereignty covenant that is withdrawn rather than dissolved is returned to the conclave's custodial record, which means in theory another Queen Regent could attempt to refile it at some future point. Will they? Not if I'm Queen Regent when that point arrives, she said. Which I intend to be. She looked at him with the silver eyes that had started this whole week as an instrument of authority and had become, over the course of it, something more honest. I have proposed to the council that the conclave develop a different relationship with sovereign-tier individuals going forward. Not custodial. Consultative. Your word or mine? Harry asked. The corner of her mouth moved. Mine first. But yours was more diplomatic. She held his gaze. The proposal includes, as a specific provision, a standing invitation to the current identified sovereign tier individual, you, to consult with the conclave on compact magic matters without any obligation of compliance or authority on either side. An invitation, Harry said. An invitation, she confirmed. Which you may accept, decline, or simply not respond to, according to your preference. No binding. No covenant. No compulsion charm on the envelope. Harry looked at her. She was standing in the ministry atrium in her deep grey robes with the certainty that was simply native to her, and she was offering him something voluntarily with no legal framework around it, which for Apollon Delacour was probably the most personally uncomfortable thing she'd done all month. He respected it enough not to make her wait. I'll accept, he said. Provisionally. On the basis that the consultation is genuinely two-directional. Meaning? Meaning if I consult with the conclave, I also expect the conclave to listen to what I actually say, rather than deciding in advance what the answer should be and consulting me as a formality. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, that is a fair condition. Good, Harry said. She started to turn, then didn't. Fleur speaks well of you, she said, to somewhere between him and the middle distance. She has for a long time. I didn't, she paused, I didn't properly take account of that, when I was preparing to come here. She's worth taking account of, Harry said. Yes, Apollon said. She is. She looked at him directly for one more moment, the full weight of the silver eyes without strategy behind them. Take care of yourself, Mr. Potter. What's coming, the war that everyone in this building is pretending might not come, will require considerably more from you than contract law. I know, he said. I know you know, she said. I'm saying it anyway. She inclined her head slightly, not a bow, not deference, more the gesture of an equal acknowledging an equal. Au revoir. She left, her guards falling into step with her, the three of them moving through the atrium crowd with that particular Veela quality of moving through space as if space had chosen to accommodate them. Hermione appeared at Harry's elbow. What was that? Productive, Harry said. She offered you something. A standing consultation with the conclave. No binding. Hermione processed this for approximately 2 seconds. That's actually quite significant. The conclave has never, I know, Harry said. You accepted. Provisionally. She looked at him. You're collecting allies, she said. Not as a criticism, more as an observation with admiration folded into it. I'm building relationships on terms I can stand behind, Harry said. That's different. She smiled at him, the real one, the one she saved for things she was genuinely proud of without the professional filter. Yes, she said. It is. He found Fleur in the atrium just as she was leaving, she'd been there for the vote, he'd known she was there, they'd acknowledged each other from across the gallery with the economy of two people who'd established that words could wait. She was pulling on her traveling cloak, the silver grey of Gringotts issue, her white blonde hair down because the workday was apparently over, and she looked up when he fell into step beside her as she walked toward the floor. Your mother found me, he said. I know. She told me. She glanced at him. She said you accepted the consultation. Provisionally. She said that too. Fleur adjusted her cloak. She also said, and I am quoting her precisely because she was very deliberate about it, that you have the most inconvenient combination of principled inflexibility and genuine openness that she has ever encountered in a political context. Is that a compliment? From her? Absolutely yes. They walked. The atrium was still full but the crowd had thinned toward the flue bank, moving in streams. Harry matched his pace to hers without thinking about it. The 5 remaining contracts, Fleur said. They're gone. Gone Friday morning. All 101. Done. She was quiet for a moment. Then, how does it feel? He thought about it honestly. Like something that was sitting on my chest has been lifted, he said. Not the contracts themselves, I'm not sure I ever felt the weight of them directly. More like, the idea that something had been decided about me by everyone except me. That's the thing that's gone. She nodded slowly, looking ahead. I think, she said, that most people spend their lives with things decided about them. What family they come from, what they're worth, what they're suitable for. Most people, she paused, most people accept the decision and work around it. You didn't, Harry said. She glanced at him. Excuse me. You went to Hogwarts for the Triwizard Tournament even though everyone thought Beauxbatons would be embarrassed by the British competition, he said. You did the second task even after the mere people nearly, he stopped, you finished. You're working at Gringotts in the London branch instead of the Paris one, which your mother clearly has opinions about. He paused. You came to see the hearing today even though it wasn't your situation. She was looking at him with the expression he'd first seen in the library, past assessment, past curiosity, into the more personal territory that she navigated carefully. You've been paying attention, she said. Since the tournament, he said. He thought about it, I was just slower to know what I was noticing. She was quiet for a moment as they reached the flow bank. She picked up a handful of powder from the public pot and turned to face him, and her expression had settled into the specific quality of someone who has made a decision and is no longer performing consideration. I finish at Gringotts at 4 on Saturdays, she said. That's specific information, Harry said. I am a specific person, she said. When I say something I mean it exactly. I know, he said. She looked at him with the grey eyes that were her own version of her mother's silver, the same quality but warmer, the same clear attention but with something in it that was entirely hers, built from the specific person she'd decided to be through the specific choices she'd made. Hogsmeade is a Hogsmeade weekend the Saturday after next, she said. I know, he said. Good, she said. She stepped into the flue and was gone in green flame, and Harry stood at the flue bank in the ministry atrium with the empty sensation of a room that had been full and was now itself again, and felt, with the specific clarity of something genuinely new, that the after that he'd been describing all week had just arrived. Sirius was waiting outside the ministry, sitting on the steps in the cold October air with a cigarette he'd almost certainly borrowed from someone and a copy of the evening edition of the Tribune that had already run the vote result. He looked up when Harry came through the doors. Well, Sirius said. Harry sat beside him on the steps. The cold came off the stone immediately but neither of them moved. Well, Harry agreed. Sirius offered him the paper. Harry looked at the headline, Wisingamot passes Heritage ACT reform, landmark change in contract law, and the smaller subheading below it, which read Contract Survey subject Harry Potter, I am not anyone's property. Hermione's line. His sentiment. On the front page of the Wizarding Tribune and by tomorrow morning on every breakfast table in Britain. He set the paper down. Your father, Sirius said, after a moment. Not introducing a topic, just saying it, the way he sometimes did, the two words as a complete thing. I know, Harry said. He would have, Sirius stopped. Started again. He would have been terrible at all the legal stuff. Absolutely hopeless with documents. Your mum would have been brilliant at it, she had Hermione's brain before Hermione. He paused. But watching you in that room today, the way you sat there and then stood up when it mattered and said the thing directly without performing any of it, he paused again, and his voice when he continued was level in the specific way of someone being level on purpose. That's him. That particular quality. The one where he just, was himself, completely, and expected the room to catch up. Harry sat with this. The cold October air, the ministry steps, the city going about its Thursday evening around them. His father's name on a blood covenant signed on the worst night of everything, trying to protect his son the only way he could find. I'm going to need your help, Harry said. With what comes next? Sirius looked at him. Dumbledore told me everything Tuesday night, Harry said. The full picture. What's coming? What I'm eventually going to have to do. He paused. I'm not going to talk about all of it tonight. But I need you to know that I know, and that I'm going to need people around me who aren't managing what they tell me. He looked at Sirius. Can you do that? Sirius held his gaze for a moment. The grin, when it came, was complicated and genuine and had sadness in it and love in it and the specific quality of a man who had spent too long being unable to be useful to someone he loved and was fiercely ready to stop. I've been trying to do that since you were 11, he said. I know, Harry said. Now I'm asking explicitly. Explicitly accepted, Sirius said. They sat on the ministry steps in companionable quiet for another few minutes. Hermione and Ron came out behind them and sat too, without asking why anyone was sitting on cold stone steps in October, because they were Hermione and Ron and they understood that some moments needed to be finished before they could be moved away from. The city moved around them, magical London doing its evening, lights beginning to come on in the buildings around the ministry entrance, the sky going the specific purple-gray of a city October dusk. 101, Ron said eventually. 101, Harry confirmed. And now 0. 0. Ron nodded. Good, he said. That's the right number. Harry smiled. Looked up at the sky over London, the same sky that had been above a house in Godric's Hollow on an October night 15 years ago, the same sky that had been above Hogwarts every morning this week while the owls came and the flue burned and the old machinery of other people's assumptions ground itself down against his refusal to accommodate it. The same sky. Different standing under it. He was 16 years old with a war ahead of him and the weight of a prophecy that he'd finally heard in full and 101 contracts that had tried to define him and were now, every single one of them, gone. He had Sirius and Hermione and Ron and McGonagall and Charlotta and, complicated and distant and real, Apollon Delacour's respect and Fleur Delacour's Saturday afternoon. He had Dumbledore's honesty, finally, however partial and overdue. He had the law of the land changed, specifically and on the record, in a way that meant no child after him would find their name on someone else's contract without their knowledge. He had himself. Completely. Without the overlay of 101 other people's claims on what he was supposed to be. He stood up from the ministry steps. Sirius stood. Hermione and Ron stood. Dinner, Harry said. Somewhere that isn't the ministry building. The Leaky, Sirius said immediately. The Leaky, Harry agreed. They went down the steps together, 4 of them, into the London evening, and the city received them without ceremony, which was exactly right. Behind them, the Ministry of Magic sat in its own enormous certainty, the vote on record in its chambers, the old heritage provisions amended and closed, the documents that had tried to own him archived somewhere in a sub-basement in the specific irrelevance of legal history. Ahead of them, everything. Harry walked into it without breaking stride.